so I'll be backwards and forwards operating again.
So we're good to go.
Okie dokie.
Okay, so welcome Steve and Lee. What a pleasure to have you here and to share your wisdom and all the things you've been doing lately. And there's, like we discussed, there's a lot of stuff, and everything can't be covered in the 3 hours, but there's going to be a lot of good things, and hopefully everybody online will ask questions and interact. So please ask questions, and I think we'll get the most out of it that way. So, but once again, welcome Steve, welcome Lee, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Hank. Thanks for having us on as well, and thank you to anyone tuning in this morning and anyone watching the recorded version of it. So what we're going to do today, I'll work with Steve. Steve's one of the world leading experts on the ground reactions, and I've come out of the long drive business and teaching tour players to add speed. So how we work as a couple as such, Steve's going to do the bit under the ground, and I'm going to do the bit over the ground. Now, this is level 2, so Steve Lloyd was done level 1 with Steve. And what we're going to show you how his stuff interacts above to the stuff I'm going to do. We're going to try and make it very practical today. So hopefully there's lots of things you can take off today that you can use on the lesson tee tomorrow and the next few years. We're going to be using a few training aids. I'm not sponsored by any training aid. It's just I've bought every possible speed training aid, and this is what I use on a daily basis. And you can make some of these things as well, which we can talk through as well. So Steve, you'd like to say a couple of words?
Yes. So thank you everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedules. We know how busy golf's becoming now, and we would like this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to, we will be stopping sort of periodically throughout the presentation to invite you to ask questions. For example, if you wanted to discuss something that you've worked on, if you've had example lessons, clients that you've worked with that you've struggled for various reasons, trying to change swing or add power or speed, any feedback that you've had when you've done any ground reaction force work with them or drills that you've learned from the level 1, we will be, we're inviting you regularly throughout this presentation to ask questions about it. So please don't hesitate to ask. So ready to go, Lee?
Yeah, please, Steve. Yeah. So we're going to pull up the first screen, and we'll talk through these screens. The first couple of screens will be pretty basic to you. You're all coaches, so this is what we're doing on a day-to-day. And the first bit is the sort of 4 pillars to increasing speed. Mechanics, let's call this mechanical advantage. What could you possibly do to change your swing that could make it go faster? Tempo, we can talk about as well, about speed and how you're going to get speed out into the club. Speed training, we'll go over a couple of little bits today relevant to what you can do, not so much in the gym, more what you can do at the range to add some speed. And body is a little bit what we can do from a training perspective. There could be a whole other seminar on gym stuff, but these are the 4 areas that really you can work at. So mechanics, mechanical advantage, tempo from a training perspective and playing, speed training on the range, and what you could possibly do with your body in the gym, but more importantly today on the range to add some speed. And day to day, this is what we're really doing. We're trying to make the club work quicker and trying to make the ball work quicker. I always find it quite interesting on the range, and this is daily for me. We'll talk about club head speed. Everyone's heard of club head speed, but I reckon 90% of the people I teach, recreational golfers, have never even heard of ball speed, and never even heard of that there's an upgrade from club head speed to ball speed. So it's an energy transfer principle. And then once you've managed to convert some club speed into ball speed, what are you going to do? You're going to launch it well. How you're going to do that, angle of attack and delivered loft, spin rate becomes important, and also where you hit it. So once you broach the subject of ball speed, where is this ball speed going to come from? And this is a big thing. And we know that, most of the tour players I teach or the long drive guys, they become almost more obsessed by ball speed in the end than club speed. But your average amateur is completely obsessed by club head speed, a little bit the other way around. Got the next screen there, please, Steve. And simply, we're trying to maximize ball speed. Once you can do that, then you're thinking about the next part. How are you going to launch it? There's some numbers there, 12 to 16. We know there's from an optimization point that works. We know Ping also do a great chart with different degrees of angles that you can launch it at, and spin rates. And spin rate, I mean, from my point of view, most people I teach The higher handicaps can't spin the ball anywhere near that number, and the spin becomes the devil, really. Certainly, if I'm in the long drive business, you know, you'll get knocked out of a tournament with being unable to control spin, and on tour, it's huge to be able to control spin. The average player that we teach can't control their spin rate. We're going to go through today key power sources, and we're going to do this actually in the system of the P system. So if you look at the top there, P1 through to P8, most of you are aware of that. If we're not, I'll give you a quick sort of idea of the P system, and it's just a reference, I believe, from Mac O'Grady originally. So P1 setup, P2, P3, P4, P5, 6, 7, and 8. At the top of each screen, the P system will be set up there in pictures. So if you can't remember it, you'll be able to see where it is. We're going to look at the key power sources through each bit. So I think it's quite interesting to see where the power comes in each part of the swing. And then if I was teaching someone, I might pick on, say, P4 to P5, they're doing something I don't like, and then I will work on that part individually. Hopefully loads of drills today that you can use tomorrow. And we're going to use some examples as well. And then back to Steve, we're then going to give the ground element to that, how the interaction of the feet and the legs are going to work on the ground as well. So then you'll be thinking above and below the ground, which is always the way I think about it as well. Now, this is for Steve to come in. We've got the fundamentals of sort of P1 to P8. And if you look at this chart, you can spend some time, and maybe when you look at the recording again, you can look at the motions and the 4 power phases that has been phrased by Steve and how they fit into the P system. And I'll let Steve continue it from here.
Okay, so we've broken it down, simplified it a little bit, put the positions into 4 different phases. So we have our loading phase, we have our uploading, downloading and launching, and there were the phases that I discussed on the level 1. So if we go down that kind of that staircase downwards and work from the loading phase into the follow through, the final step on the right hand side of the screen, we really start from that left hand side, and it's that initial trigger or counter move, the move that kind of gets things going, starts the engine, and that's that medial lateral force, the side to side. This force, that push away from the lead foot, is going to start the movement and trigger the movement of the golfer's center of mass, their combined center of mass, and shift it towards the trail side. So we know that from a moment arm perspective, if we move the center of mass away from the line of force, we get that bigger moment, bigger lever. You know, the analogy that I used in level 1, the spanner that turns the car. If you try to take the wheel nut off of your car, and I gave you 2 tools to do it, the little spanner, tiny lever, or the big wrench with a big lever. I can apply more force further away from the nut with the big lever. And it's the reason why we have the door handle at the furthest point away from the hinge. So we move the center of mass, we go into this loading phase as we move into that second step of the ladder there. And the golfer is pushing away and they're triggering, they've got this move, which moves center of mass over to trail. It begins to lift and they reach this sort of shaft horizontal position at the end of the loading phase there. Their center of mass is kind of now going into its kind of floating phase. So the unweighting phase begins. The unweighting is the lifting of the arms. The spine is coming out of its flex position. It's getting that, it's moving up towards its 0 positioning. So we're uploading from P2 to P4 is the upload, is the lift. So we begin the unweighting and we reach that kind of top of backswing. There's a push away from the trail that begins during the upload as well, which is part of the recentering in certain shots. Some golfers that we know, certainly with long drivers, don't get everything recentered because of the equipment they're using to launch it. So we've got that, by the end of that top of backswing, we've got that push away from the trail. We reach top of backswing, and then we enter the 3rd phase there. So the 4th block along is the download. So download is when the golfer is really in free fall. They're at max unweighted position. So they're at their lightest state. We know that some of the long drivers get to a point that they're about 40 to 45% of their body weight. They are extremely light because they're in free fall. The club is now going to be lowered. The arms are lowering. The spine is changing flex. The hips are changing flex. Knees. lots of segments of the body are changing orientation. So the downloading phase goes from the top of the backswing and is going to be ending at a round shaft vertical. So we move to the 5th step along and we reach that kind of end of the downloading phase. And we know that there's been a shift of pressure towards the lead side. We know we are maximizing vertical force. We're at our heaviest state now. And heavy means we're pushing away from the ground, maximum force. We've applied force forwards through the lead foot, sideways through the lead foot, and away from the ground. So from this end of the download, we are now in a position where we're going to be jumping and moving into impact. So as we move through into the 6th step along, we enter the launching phase. The lead foot is going to start to now lift and move away from the ground because of that forward anterior posterior force, which is creating this movement. The foot is not only going to lift, but it's going to start to move back. And we see that with the fastest players on the planet. They have that biggest trace of that arc or rainbow shaped trace of that floating lead foot. That moves us into impact and then into follow through. So there are kind of our 4 phases of power, bringing the P system into kind of those 4 different phases. Moving on to the next one, over to you, Lee.
Yeah, at this point, it's important to sort of, we're talking driver here today. We're not going to be doing this for some of the irons. And also we're talking about the fastest, and we're talking the commonalities of the fastest. So we do know there's some outliers who don't quite do all of these bits, but it's a speed day. So we're looking at speed and we're looking at commonalities of the fastest players. So on this next screen that you're looking at, this is sort of my go-to in my brain when I always go back to it. We want energy at impact. And we know from a scientific point of view, there's 2 types of work that you can do on the club, linear and angular work. And probably the best analogy I've ever seen for this to explain this is linear work. If I take this sort of ball, and you'll see how this fits into the training later, and say I'm going to hit my hand here with the ball. If I kept the force exactly the same, the only way I could apply more power to my hand would be to make this move further. And if you think of the car analogy, if a car was broken down, if I'm pushing the car, I need a certain amount of time to get it moving. And the more time, the faster I can get it. Or secondly, I can add more force. So therefore, over the same time period, if I add more force here, I can hit my hand harder. So the length I move it or the force I move it with can make it go further. Now, I'm not a scientist, but the scientists will tell you in the main that linear work gives you more of your club edge speed than angular work. So a lot of the stuff today will be linear, but we'll also explain how I will teach angular work. Now, linear work from a swing perspective is the distance that your hands from a golf point of view travel in space. You can see I'm making a weird looking backswing for a reason in a minute, but so the distance my hands can travel both back and down, the force I can apply down that length, and then in the downswing, very much the shape of my hands in their arc can apply speed from a linear and angular perspective. Now, the reason my swing looked weird there as I came back up here is I applied no angular work. And angular work here is, so from here, if I hold it on its mass, this rotation of the club, the only way I can hit my hand harder is the same force but of a bigger angle, or I can increase the torque here and hit my hand harder this way. This is hidden within the linear work. So as you look at yourself swinging back here, you're going to see my club go, imagine round the clock. So John Daly or a long drive guy might swing 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock. I'm an old man these days, I can't get it back here, but somewhere down to about 5 o'clock. So that's the motion of the club rotating around itself, and it changes its rotational direction through the swing, which we'll go on to talk about later. So at the bottom of the graph there, linear work. How could you make it more linear work? Hand path length longer and force along the hand path. And a lot of the drills today will be related to those things. And angular work, amount of club rotation around its center of mass, and the talk about the rotation axis. Can you make that go faster?
So that fits in, obviously, now we talk about a little bit about the ground reaction forces. So energy at impact coming from, we've got force precedes motion. We've got on the left-hand side then our foot action, the direction that we push with our feet through our feet, and then the resultant ground reaction force. So below that sits our three linear forces, kind of whether you call them shearing forces. So in the medial lateral, as we know, is the side to side, crudely, if I'm moving this way. The anterior posterior is me pushing my foot out of the front of my shoe. So whether that be, toe to heel or heel to toe. And then we've got the vertical, effectively removing force, free falling towards the ground, changing for pushing away from the ground and increasing vertical force. So those ground reaction forces are to create a torque or a rotation about our center of mass. And as I demonstrated and showed you in the level 1 there, we discussed this rotation about our center of mass in actually 3 planes, but we're referencing mainly 2 of them today. So this torque here, the windmill torque or the face on frontal plane torque. So when I start to do this, my body can tilt, okay? So the forces that are making me turn this cog around and get me rotating about my center of mass. So that tilting torque. The second one is horizontal plane torque. So now if I was to get the camera, place it in the ceiling, make it look down, the forces anterior, posterior, those heel to toe, toe to heel forces, and the coupling effect from both feet, making this wheel turn in this direction. So the rotation about my center of mass that helps me open up my body and rotate primarily my pelvis in this direction. So we kind of add those 2 together. We'd kind of have this in an angular motion. We'd start to create angles and inclination across our body as we tilt and turn at the same time. So we can add those 2 torques together to give us a total amount of torque. We know the swing is not vertical, neither is it horizontal. So we got any, before we move on to the next slide then and cover this one, have we got any questions regarding the 4 phases of power, that first slide that I discussed with the staircase, and then the 2 kind of with Lee discussing above the ground and me discussing in basic terms below the ground and more of the detail that we had in the level 1. Any questions on those slides?
There's only one question in the chat is will we get the slides after this? But if the mic is open, so if there's any questions, please just ask.
Absolutely, yes. As always, Hank, yeah, I will supply the presentation for this course. So yeah, so we got obviously that one, the staircase there with the 4 phases of power, where we brought all of the P system into the 4 phases, and the discussion there, me explaining the ground reaction forces. And then we've got above the ground how speed can be created with linear work and angular work. And then below the ground, the foot action force and the rotational torque about the body center of mass. Okay.
Can I ask one question? If you go back the slides to the steps.
Yep.
Just as a practical, like yourself and Lee, if you start working with people, where do you see, like, with the P's where you work the most? Is it P1 to P5, or is it more kind of like the P5, P7 is reactions? Or do you have to kind of go through how to kind of move and jump in during the P5, P7, or is it just pure reaction?
Yeah, so I don't know if I've got an answer for that, Hank. So from a point of view from P1, it really would depend on the person. I think what we'll do as we go through these stages, we'll sort of talk about commonalities of problems that I see in different areas. And for some people, it could be their takeaway motion, which is the first bit we're going to get on. A lot of people don't move the club very well here. From a body position, I think how you turn to the top and your hands work. But I guess the main area I would do P4 to P5 is where you're going to get a lot of speed. So I guess if answering the question from that perspective, P4, P5 is an area I do an awful lot of work on to try and get some linear work in that club quite early. Steve, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's all shot dependent for me, Hank. So, if we were to take 3 different shots and 3 different kind of really ground reaction forces and talks about the center of mass, as I said, in level 1, there's a wedge shot, there's short game, there's iron shots, and there's driver. We're talking primarily drive and speed and power today. But for example, somebody struggling, you know, with iron shots, I'd be looking at, you know, quite often we see this kind of blend. There's too much of what they would do in the driver. So let's talk about the recentering move. So they get their center of mass shifting. They're not recentering. They get to P4 and the center of mass is still traveling towards trail side. So the problem you've got now is you've got to have a big medial lateral push. So then they start to slide. We've got problems then controlling the slide. They can't push back off their lead foot. So we have this kind of look going for impact. Or you have somebody that struggles to create enough push to even get back their pressure, get their pressure returning back over to their lead side or the center of mass moving there. So medial lateral tends to be one that I use all the time. So if we go from a power route, it would be push off the lead, push back off the trail to counter it. If we're going for an iron or wedge shot, really just focusing on the recentering. So center of mass comes back to center and ahead of center. We know with wedge center of mass is hardly moving at all. So keeping them center to slightly left to help them with the attack angle and the D plane that we need to work with that attack angle as well. So yeah, I kind of go with it. It's all dependent on shot from my perspective. And obviously with the plates, you've got then the benefit of getting the measurements. So then we can really then focus specifically on what forces are lacking or what forces they're really using to, you know, to help them, which one is their primary source. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks to you both.
Perfect. Any more questions on those, Hank?
Not from me. Anybody else? I warned you, Lee, so it's going to be short question and answer.
At the end, think about it, yeah. There might be some questions then. So we'll crack on, but as we said many times, at any point, if you don't be afraid to ask a question, however you feel it's a good one or a bad one, any question is a good one, yeah?
Or send them anonymously to Hank, so we don't know who you are, then it would be good. But look, you know, we're open for full discussion. We'd happily discuss any examples of pupils or lessons that you had in the past. Good fun. We had some great interaction yesterday with that stuff. So, all right, moving on to the next one then, Coxie, over to you, P1 to P2.
So again, I know most of you will know the P system. If you don't know it, it's always at the top of that screen. P1, start point to P2. Now, the first thing's pre-primed at setup, and I guess Bryson's a good example of this, in that when you see he's going for some of his big shots, you'll start moving around. And this priming part is a good part to get everything going and to get some speed into the club. So I'm always interested from speed into the club, or Steve's always interested in the bit that's happening. Now, we know that most players that will do that will either have a priming or they'll have a counter move or something to get this going. And if you were practicing on the range and you're trying to build up speed, it's a really good way. I get them jumping their feet around and moving, and we can get a nice movement. Ironically, Joe Miller, the two-time world long drive champion, I've talked since a kid, one of the fastest men who ever lived, doesn't have one. So he doesn't prime. But we're talking about commonalities. Lee Westwood doesn't move around much at address, but we're talking about commonalities that most people do. Steve, your perspective on being primed at setup?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I use Carl Berkshire as the big example of that. So his priming is obviously more of this move. So from my perspective, I see the medial lateral force almost like a wave in the graph. We're starting to see this left to right, right to left push. So the side to side movement, it's not backwards and forwards movement they're doing, it's side to side movement that they're doing away and towards the target. So certainly from that perspective, when we start to go down the power route, when somebody's trying to get energy into the club really nice and early, you know, I'm looking for a bigger push off that left side. So that priming as they go from right to left, and then a big push off the left, it just creates that, you know, impulse, work over time. And if we start to move the club and we move it faster, then we're going to have to apply a force greater to actually start to slow it down and change direction. So I see that as a big one, the primer.
And then talking about that sort of counter moves. Now, at the top of the swing, P1 to P2, is a guy called Martin Borgmeyer. He's one of my students. He's probably the fastest man on the planet. I've used him because the exaggeration. So obviously we can take a tour player. You might not see the motion as much on a 2D video. So I put a long drive guy up there just because you can see a lot of the movement. And if we look at those trigger moves, it says Wolf, Borgmeyer, Stenson. Borgmeyer is the long drive guy. We'll see Matt Wolf's sort of reverse move. Martin Borgmeyer makes this reverse move, so a counter move. The one I see mainly with very good players is the knee kick in motion to move it back. Now, This will trigger move, counter move, whatever you want to call it. Now, the object is to get speed into the club early. This is one of my first, and you'll see me use this later. I think this is a winner. It's called a lag popper. I think it's excellent for training speed and getting speed out to the club. And later on, much later in the seminar, when we talk about angular work, you'll see the genius of this and getting speed out to the other end. Now, what we're going to be talking today, as we go forward, is that, you know, obviously the body plays a big part into it. But if we look at sort of segment movement on 3D, we know that lady pros have sort of very fast hip movement, very often quicker than men pros. And some of those are quicker than long drives. But long drivers are able to get speed out to the left arm and the lead arm and the hands, and they're able to get speed out to the club. So where we're going to be going today is actually going to be working on ground, body, and how does speed get out to these ends of your hands and the club. So from that perspective, if we look at this, the trigger move, what I'm really trying to do, and you can see this blue bit moving in the audio feedback of it, as I'm starting to move, you can hear it start to move quite quickly into this. So I'm getting speed out very quickly to this end. And as Steve just alluded to, by doing that, I've then got to slow it down, decelerate, and go the other way. And the counter moves. So let's take Matt Wolf and Martin Borgmar. So anti-clockwise to go clockwise with the hips. Right knee goes in to go back, goes down to go up. Now, from that perspective, it can help you to get speed. And if you took a simple sort of med ball throw, and I'd have one of these, and sometimes people ask me the weight, so this is a 3 kilogram one. You can get heavier. From my experience, 3 kilograms is a good number. I use med balls quite a lot. If you're going to buy one, be careful that you don't get one that bounces, because later on, if you do the exercise here, it'll bounce and knock you out, yeah? So get one that's soft, that doesn't have much bounce. Now, if I was throwing this ball over to Steve here and I wanted to get some speed into it, I'd want to get my body going first to get the speed out to the end, much more so than that. Now, tour players do that, just do a mini version of it, but that would allow me to get much more speed into the throw. And what we'll see with nearly all good players, what Steve will go into in a bit, is that when I move this way across, I have this across movement of the center of my mass, and it changes a lot. And Steve will go through the amount based on the player now, long drivers or pros.
I'm going to, on the next slide, we actually got Stenson, and we see Stenson's little pre-swing move, and I usually use the comparison of Stenson and Rory, so Rory being more dynamic, the shift, Stenson being more of a preset of the center of mass over towards the trail side. So on the third bullet there on the power sources on the left side of this particular slide is that, we've put down the center of mass lowers. So the golfer is really lowering themselves towards the ground to push themselves up. So what that allows them to do is to get really what we're trying to achieve is to reach acceleration of the center of mass and get to peak acceleration by the time we get to P2. So during that loading phase, it's very important. I quite kind of often I reference this as, I show this as an example. If I'm going to throw this ball up in the air, as soon as the ball leaves my hand, it's at peak acceleration up. So it goes into this decel state now. So it's deaccelerating, it's going to reach its highest point, its peak of its trajectory there, and then it's going to be in free fall. So then it's now in peak acceleration down. So that's when it's at its lightest state. So we really want to get that going up as quick as we can and across, and have it all done by P2. So the amount of across varies, and from a power perspective, when the golfers we're seeing that create the most club head speed have the biggest shift of their center of mass over towards their trail side, but they get it done the earliest. Okay, so we get 6 inches of travel of the center of mass over towards trail side of stance, and tour players anything between 2 and 4 inches. Now, the tour player will generally reach that range and length of travel by P3. The long driver who's moved 6 inches is done by P1.5, no later than P2. So we've got golfers that are creating different speeds there, but actually they're doing it more. Now, if I was to turn back the clock and say 3 years ago, I wouldn't have anyone moving their center of mass at all. Put a line down the screen, I wouldn't have that, because I felt for me to keep everything still and move it left. And I know why I did that, because it certainly helped with specific shots. So it comes back to what is the player trying to play? What club have they got in their hands? The downward attack angle, the upward attack angle, and the shifting of the D plane that matches that. So long drivers, bigger shifts, faster accelerations, beginning that stop or even gentle recentering. Tall players, a little bit less, more push off the trail, stopping of it, and then back to centre or slightly ahead, because they've got to play that full variety. They've got the entire range of shots that they need to play golf. Over to you for the last one, low and slow.
Yeah, so the low and slow back. So a myth, we know again there's outliers. Some players move a little slow in the first phase, but nearly anyone is fast. And the first thing I noticed in long drive 15 or 20 years ago when I started doing the first lesson, do you know when your club makes a noise on the way down, these guys were making a noise on the way back. So from that perspective, that's a bit unusual from that. And the low and slow also came from a Jack Nicklaus book where he talked about moving it low and slow, but in reality, he actually didn't do that. It was just a feeling that he had. So getting speed out, and that's again why I use that. Now, if you're going to do some speed training work, and as a coach, you need something to measure with. Now, for those who are lucky enough to have a launch monitor or their establishment has a launch monitor, that will help you to get some measurements. But I'd recommend buying for coaching either two of the cheaper sort of launch monitors. SSR, the winner is the PRGR, if any of you have seen that, PRGR. Now, this measures, it's about 180 pounds. This measures club head speed, and it also measures ball speed. Now, it also measures practice swings, which from my perspective, from a training point of view, is very important. Practice swings without a ball and with a ball and hitting objects. The PRGR is also very interesting in that when you put it here, it measures backswing. So I stumbled across this a few months ago by accident. I started making the swing and it was picking up the backswing. So then I could actually use it from a perspective of getting speed out to the club early. And if any of you have ever used any of the tones, the Tour Tempo tones, or there's other tone company where they sort of go beep, 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 so beep, 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 where you go start, top, and then strike. Normally this takes about 1 second. 0.8 of that second is your backswing, and 0.2 is your downswing on average. It's about 1 second. Now, many people I'll be teaching day today. I had someone last week, she had the 3 beeps gone, and she'd only got to here. So she'd done the second, and the club had only moved that far. So for most people, swinging it back fast, more recreational golfers, they'll be anti it. They've got this idea that they've got to stay still and move it away slowly. And sometimes just upping the speed of the club head or increasing the tempo, so they've got to move the club over the same period over a much shorter period of time, will give a massive burst of speed.
So over to the next. So we've got this.
Sorry, go back one. So speed on, didn't you?
Oh yes, the drills and exercises. Yeah.
So you want to use that? Do you want to speed on first? Speed on.
Yeah.
I'll do that while Steve's getting that. So you can see leg popper. The leg popper is just this machine here. Do it back. I'm being silly. You could put a toilet roll on there and get the same sort of motion going back. But this is good because of the speed and the noise. Probably one of the best. And also, Steve has something here. Mach 3 is another company that makes speed equipment. And this speed bomber, Steve, this is probably your favourite tool for takeaway move, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've used this with a lot of players. In level 1, the case study that we had of the challenge tour player that we increased, we went speed from 106 stroke 108 over to 114, and we get him up to 117. This was the first move that I used with Alfie, was kind of swinging it forward and then going back. So you can see from the lowering of my center of mass and then the lifting and the accelerating of it here towards trail side, but the push that I need off my lead side to kind of get this thing moving. Now this is quite heavy. It's got very little flex to it. This is a Mach 3 training aid, and you know, it's just very good for this first movement, and I get them to swing to around shaft horizontal. If it bleeds out to arm horizontal, it's absolutely fine, no problem. We know that tour players generally have it stop in there anyway, but I try and always aim to try and get it to stop and just go as fast as they can. And what Coxie sort of mentioned there as well is using that PRGR, you can start to measure the speed they're moving the club in that first phase and during the takeaway.
Also for those not teaching on mats or grass, quite another good exercise. I'd call it an Excalibur drill, or the sword in the stone. You can put a tour stick, stick it into the ground, and then the person to get it out the ground has to move back and upwards. And this is a move that can really actually get those two movements that Steve loves to get back and up as you try and drag it maybe the 1 or 2 inches out the floor.
So then if we use 2 examples, so we got Joe there on the left-hand side, and Lee sort of put the lines around his trunk there, just demonstrating.
Sure.
And we know from level 1 that the actual trunk represents, that's 58% of your center of mass. So if you're moving trunk over towards trail side, we know that it's in flexion, it's in that part. During that early takeaway, it's still in flexion, it hasn't zeroed out straight away, has it? So if we're moving it in slight flexion and coming out of flexion during that takeaway phase, well, that's going to move the center of mass over to trail. Club and arms about 28% of the center of mass, pelvis less than 20. So really that movement of the shift of the center of mass is dominated by the movement of the trunk.
Yeah.
Hey, quick question.
I've sort of exaggerated the thing from there as a long drive guy, and we've got Stenson obviously next to that. We're going to play the video, but just for the exaggerated long drive, you can just see it happening a bit more. And you can play the Stenson video. There's the
Yeah, we've got a question coming
sorry.
through. Hank, can we finish this slide and we go on to that question?
Yeah, so just then wait for a minute. So
Yeah, cool, no problem. So the Stenson move here then, so I'm just going to show, so let's reference one of the golf clubs in the bag there, and we'll look at Stenson's move as it shifts across. So that preset of the pelvis across, and then obviously that allows him, it gives him almost the wall to push or butt his right hip up against, and then he can start the recentering move. You know, Rory's very different, it's more dynamic, it's during the takeaway, but Stenson, we can quite clearly see he started to move across there, and then he doesn't move any more than this point here. So now the right hip is going to start to move towards the lead heel, which is all part of that kind of pushing back off the right side. So he starts that medial lateral push away from the trail foot, which recenters the pelvis. And then he's got less work to do in the downswing, as we know. And these guys are delivering these clubs at different attack angles. So it's very important that they have a pattern that they can blend nicely between clubs. So question, Hank, should we go into that question that you got, mate?
yeah, there was a Teemu that wanted to ask a question. So go ahead, Teemu.
Yeah, sure. So when you practice this kind of like loading into one from a P1 to P2, do you often see that the player starts to lose the posture, like the head is lifting a lot?
So we talked about posture, shoulder plane. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so posture, not necessarily. I mean, if we look at Bryson, for instance, and a lot of super fast guys like Carl Barcher, they immediately stand up, and then what they'll do is they'll put that back in a little later. From a long drive perspective, they don't tilt that much. That's not tour, so they'll tend to get relatively horizontal hips and pretty horizontal shoulders that they can move and get this way onto the way down. So it wouldn't bother me particularly from my perspective if they did have a little bit of stand up and potentially going this way a little bit, which they can use on the way down, could add a little bit more speed. Again, we took it at the ultimate speed perspective. And for a lot of players making that same move, they'll hold their spine. From a 3D perspective, how does that come out on your ball?
It's a good question, Timo, that one actually, to be honest, because again, I would put that back, you know, when you're measuring it and you're seeing the data, that's traveling too far over to the trail. So that golfer has a lack of push away from the trail foot. So the brake that's stopping him from moving is not being applied. So he will continue to move posturally out of the inclination that he needs to get. And then he'd try and put it back in too late. So I'd have that step-in drill, and I'd certainly have him pushing underneath the right side a little bit earlier. So if you had foam, you know, the pool noodles, I mean, a lot of the drills that we've got later in the presentation, but if you put something, I mean, you could have the wedge here as well. You know, the Wedge Pro is quite a good little device, and you have that underneath the trail foot. So if I've got something that's given me some resistance and push back, then you're going to find that they're going to be much better with that. And like Lee said, I think from a stretch shortening perspective and cycle, if there is a slight up and then they can bring it back in at the top, we know that during the free fall, that would be then getting the con, having it unweighted, and then that free fall, putting it back in at the top will allow them to have that very high unweighting, which we know, then that helps us create that higher or heavier move that we need to push their center of mass away from the ground in that later phase of the downswing. Does that make sense?
Yep, good.
I suppose as a flaw though, I mean, I have taught many people who get no left side bend at all and a lot of right side bend. Obviously at that level, that would be too much.
Yeah.
So next screen now. Cool.
So we've got the counter move then.
Yeah, so this is just an extreme version of a Matt Wolf, and as we look at that first motion, this swing is about 158 clubbing speed and 230 ball speed. So, but two things I want to take from that, and again, it's an exaggerated motion, is how fast the backswing is. This tempo of this swing is, considering the length of it, is far faster than a normal swing as an exaggeration. And we'll see that triple barrel move. It's a little bit quick to see it. So counterclockwise, clockwise hips, right knee flex, pull it back, go down to go up, but just gets the whole thing moving a little bit. Just some videos to sort of talk about what we were sort of showing there. Here's Martin swinging forward. Again, if you were on a PRGR and you were going to measure the club head speed, this immediately would give a higher club head speed to end takeaway by the fact you're moving it forward and backwards.
That video's turned skewed. Sorry about this, guys. That video's decided to turn the wrong way around. The presentation, it'd be fine. I'll send you the correct videos to do with the codecs on the PC.
This was so Steve, you want to tell us, is that Alfie?
Yes, that's Alfie. So we actually had that. That was on the case study of the level 1. So Alfie just doing that move where he's with the speed bomber. We're getting him priming a little bit, moving it forward, and then accelerating it back. So they're accelerating back. And again, even from here, you're seeing that I'm not losing that inclination here. I'm not going into trail side bend. I've still got enough of lead side bend. So yeah, that's that move there is very powerful.
What was he speeding, Chris?
So we went from 106. I think he pushed out. I think he was maxing at around 108, but he's generally cruising at 106. He's now 114. He plays comfortably.
One on the challenge tour.
One on the challenge tour with the increased distance as well. So whenever I see Alfie, he tends to get back towards 112, and we overspeed train and get him up to 117 to bring the gamer back out to 114.
Next slide there, please.
We may have some of these videos. If it decides to do this, there'll be a few that might do that later on. Okay. But I've got the hard copies of the videos, which will send. Good. So without having to break your neck to turn that and see that horizontal.
Standing on the ball there.
Right.
And this is a med ball. And what I'm saying about the med balls, this is a friend of mine, Josh Kosh in America. Now, obviously, he's got the bouncy med ball here. Yeah, this is the one that you don't want to throw into the ground that comes back up at you. But you can see the counter motion. He's having to go forward to go backwards. And if anyone's seen any of Dr. Kwan's stuff there, he's bringing in these sort of step moves to get speed to the club. So a really good way to train it.
There's a lot of marine grade rope as well. So he gets the kind of rope. We see Kwan using this quite a lot. So he gets like a marine grade rope here. So it's quite thick rope. You see a lot of stuff with Kwan stuff online where he's just got in the rope. You know, and really it's, you know, getting the body to shift before the rope goes. So we're getting more of this action, left to right, medial lateral, away from the lead foot here. The torso's moving, the trunk's starting to go, and then I can get the rope to go. And then coming down as well, we're beginning to get that kind of movement of the lower body before the rope moving back. So that's a very good exercise, whether it be med ball or whether you use rope, just from a timing perspective to get that critical first phase, P1 to 2, done correctly.
So now we're going to go to P2 to P4. Obviously, the P2 to P4s have been put at the top again. The swing is exaggerated in the length of it because it's a long drive guide, but that's P2 to P4. We'll talk through the power sources again, and then we'll talk through the drills and exercises. So, talking about earlier, I said that the whole point of getting speed is initially to get speed out to the arm. So what separates the fastest, the very fast arm speeds on the way down, and then get speed out to the club. So I'll put loading the left arm in 2 planes. So what do I mean by that? Is that as I'm going to swing here, my arm's going to come from down to up, okay? And it's also going to work across and away. So elevation, depression, adduction, abduction. Let's just think up and down and across and away. And this becomes very important as I'm trying to produce speed, because as we're going to work this up here, I'm going to do a blend of both. It's going to go up. The amount of across does depend on the individual, not so much on the way down where that becomes more important. And we know that by lengthening the hand path in that first bit, and I'll always go back to the linear and angular, if I can make that go a little bit longer and a little bit higher, I've got perspective, I've got a chance to produce more speed from that. So loading the left arm in 2 planes, I've got it from an up, down motion, across and away motion, and then we're going to use those and then unload them. So if I'm going to load them, I'm going to unload them. A very famous book called The Golf Machine, and one of their principles was the movement of the left arm into across the chest to create a triangle and across from it. This for me is great for adduction, abduction, or throwing a frisbee, but it's missing the elevation to down element. And as we go on, that will become more relevant to creating speed in the downswing.
So I've got the next bullet there is really just what I covered a little bit on the last between 1 and 2 as well. So then we are in this uploading phase. So basically the center of mass is kind of in decel, it's slowing down. We know it reaches the top of the backswing and then it's going to change into acceleration and go down again. So we are seeing, we know from coming out of flexion, exchanging that for, for side bend or lateral flexion, we're coming out of that front bend, moving into side bend. We know arms are lifting in those. Most of the players that we see that create speed, they're outliers that don't, but generally the higher arms, they're coming out, they're zeroing out of the spine and its flexion, and the arms getting high. So that allows us then to move into the next phase, which would be from P4 to P5. But that upload move is the acceleration and deceleration, the center of mass floating before it starts to head back down towards the ground again.
So on the next point, we're going to talk about hip, but we're going to talk about the body, is that I like to see 4 stretches across the system. So I like to see a stretch across the pelvis hip area. I like to see a stretch across the T-spine, the thoracic, the rib cage. I'd like to see a stretch across the shoulder complexes and the wrist complexes. Now we know that the wrists themselves don't have particularly strong muscles, but the forces and torques working through the wrist are very high. So a lot of this will be getting stretching across those systems. And I'll sort of give you an idea of how I would teach this a little bit. I might teach it 2 or 3 ways. Potentially, I could teach it with this is a med ball, a Swiss ball, sort of up against the wall here, and I would rotate this around to get my hips moving. But one thing I tend to use at my teaching bay is I've got some of these bungee cords. So if I come in close to you, it's a bungee cord, and I would attach this hook to the wall so I could train this myself. Or if I was teaching, I'd be holding this. So if we did this with Steve, so if you could just put this around your bum there, please, I'll just bring that out in front of you. So the first thing it says is that we're driving the right hip into a state of internal rotation. So we could say from here that I've moved my mass across to the right leg, I can stabilize my right femur in space, and then I can drive my pelvis. So the objective is to make these 2 areas get closer to each other. So go back to the beginning, Steve. So middle there, and they're going to get nearer to each other as this driven into internal. But as I do this, I'm purposely trying to stop Steve doing it. So I'm holding, and I would actually, as he's doing it, I'm going to give him a little pull. Now I'm trying to pull him into the wrong move, so he's having to fight me to get into a good move. So here he is moving the top of his thigh bone backwards while stabilizing his legs. So this is driven. Now, you've got 6 rotator muscles that sit at the back here. We're trying to stretch them so we can contract them on the way down. And we'll do the same as before, Steve. We'll work that up the body, under the armpit, please. Other way, mate. So this time, so we're going to go rib cage. So under the armpit, exactly the same exercise. I'm going to try and do it. And Steve's going to try and get his left pec across to this. And then we can actually start to get his rib cage moving a little bit. So now that's going to move across. And then there's actually a potential to make your upper shoulders work faster than your midsection, because of the ability for your shoulder blades to stretch across your back. So if I took this a stage further here, and Steve's trying to go against me, so I'm just going to move that above his arm and put that now across his right shoulder blade. When Steve gets here, he's going to have to retract that scapula, and he's going to have to move this one and protract it. The trouble is you might take someone's head off from it. Steve's going to punch with his left arm this way. Now, how would that help from a speed perspective is that if this shoulder protracts and this one retracts, you can move them slightly faster. And then on the downswing, you can then move them back to their original position. But the extra motion that you put in your left shoulder can give you more speed. And your right arm position here, we've got a lovely stretch across this shoulder complex that can add more speed to it. Okay, so next bit, I think from this is a bit personal to me because I went from a very big hitting youngster and I had a bit of speed taught out of me, and it was taught out of me on the basis that I was told to keep my knees touching this line into the backswing, and because of my age, I was a product of the 90s, which was distance through resistance and holding this from here, and I was stripped out from a lot of speed. Now, we know that a lot of pelvic motion is to do with repositioning the legs. So the joints at the lower spine don't rotate very much. So I'm really taking the top of my right thigh bone, moving that back a bit, the front of my left thigh bone moving here. And this will bring in some knee flex change, some ankle change in the sort of the flexion and extension, which Steve would talk from an AP perspective. But don't be frightened to move the knees and the legs, because this allows you to get this pelvis moving. From an AP perspective, Steve?
Yeah, so I mean, again, using the wedge pros here, we had the clock card on level 1, so we are just talking about, you know, pushing the foot this way or pushing the foot this way to go backwards and forwards. So then if we was to put some wedges either side, then it'd give us that feel for how I can create from heel to toe this way to toe to heel this way. So kind of getting that kind of move through both feet to help the body, help the pelvis rotate, and get into into the position that we would need to in the backswing.
And we were talking with Hank earlier that I'm no good at technology, so I'm an expert at knowing experts, and this is how me and Steve met many years ago, is that although I have some ideas, I can't measure them. So say I would send someone to Steve, and for me, I tried to buy a K vest. I bought a K vest and I bought other stuff, but I could never run it properly. And then I went to Steve. So I'd work on a movement, and if I had a new student, I'd then send them down to Steve. He would then verify doing it brilliantly, not doing it brilliantly, the times are good. So for someone like me, or, you know, if you haven't got to reach out to someone who can do these things for you. There'll be an expert. Hank can do these things for you, yeah? So find someone who can measure. So if you can't do it yourself, get someone else. I tried to do everything well myself. It didn't work. So if you can't do it, make friends with someone who can do it for you. So we're going to look at the drills and exercises. Oh, sorry, one last thing there at the bottom. High hands are faster. This could be relevant or irrelevant. If you went to a long drive tournament, you aren't going to be winning one unless you've got high hands. And that would also take you through Rod Barber, Jack Nicklaus, and many other players who are a bit longer, Justin Thomas potentially. Basically, it gives you more room to get the club down your back. You're going to have a longer, more vertical hand path, more chance to apply force down the hand path. However, we know on tour, there are many players who don't have steep swings. The point of that is that high hands are faster, but if you're teaching someone who has a flatter swing, maybe don't think so much in terms of steeping it, just try and lengthen it. So faster, higher or faster, but you can still get speed from other patterns. So what do the med ball stitching, what do the throwing and the catching one?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. So med ball over the shoulders, really that kind of the upload move. So we're really trying to get this going over that direction. So towards the shutter, don't do it with the shutter down. So we're going into this position here. And I don't quite often do this with resistance bands as well. A variation of this med ball over the shoulder drill, what you could do instead of throwing it over the shoulder would be to throw it straight up in the air and then catch it and then slam it down, which will help you move into the next phase, which is the download and the acceleration of the center of mass back. A really good drill that kind of guides the player into the position where they need to. And again, this would be more over that way, wouldn't it? This allows me to get it up and over the shoulder. So managing inclination specific to the shot as well. They're certainly going to be able to do that with that drill. So it's a really good drill.
So we'll look at those sort of next couple of things there, sort of resistance band drills. So I've been using these for years It's a standard resistance band. The colour of the band relates to the resistance. So if there's any ladies watching there, or you're working with seniors, you might want stronger or heavier. Long drive guys, you might want it fatter. But the resistance bands are good, and you can use this many ways. I've got a lead shoulder drill here where I get it under my armpit and pull it out in front of me, which really helps me from here just to get some stretch up into the system here, and also helps with my right arm later on from a landing perspective as I want to move it down here. I can reverse this round the other way. And bands aren't expensive, but I'd have loads in my bay, just do it. And then from this perspective, I'm then working on my left arm, loading across this shoulder complex as I move down. And you can actually, with the thinner ones, hit a few shots with it. Did an interesting thing with Martin Ballby the other week, where he had the thinner band going out and swinging a club. You've got the thinner band there?
I haven't got the thinner band, yeah, no, I've got the same.
And we were doing an exercise where he got it around the corner, and he got his club to the top, and we had this measured on 3D at Feminist last week.
Yeah, yeah.
And as it moves down, I can't get the band out in front of me, that's sorry. He's hitting shots with it, and this motion up to down increased his hand speed by about 1 to 2 miles an hour. Now in the long drive business, that's a lot. So you can actually hit shots in that. And remember, it's all about getting speed out to that left arm. Now, what we did there is the turn drill, which I've already showed you, which is to get the shoulders to rotate faster. And I think something, again, with recreational golfers can be a bit enlightening, is that they tend to sort of do this drill where the hands are stuck on their chest, but you've basically locked in your shoulder blades. Now, if you ask a lot of people, they would think their shoulders are actually connected as opposed to independent. And when you start to sort of free up their shoulder complex, it frees up their brain and the freedom possible, and there's more speed to be had there. And that's just a diagram. In actual fact, those shoulder blades can go up and down as well, and other factors, but we're just looking about the motion of retraction to protraction. And even if you're videoing someone in the summer, like you, we don't have great summers, but you can see their shoulder blades are moving and sliding across. And it can really open someone's freedom up for motion. And therefore, always back to that first bit, linear angular, it can increase the length of the hand path and get a lovely stretch across that shoulder complex. And a couple of drills there coming up.
So we just show this med ball one, so without the shutter being able to throw the ball.
So you see Josh, if we play that again, he also gets a step pattern going with this as well. We done the first one. So he's moving in, stepping and throwing, and he's just producing more stretch there. So obviously you've just got to be careful who you're throwing it at, yeah? So Steve, you want to talk through that? You have that gadget, don't you?
Yeah, so you can buy this on that actually on Amazon, and I'll send you some of these links, Hank, so you can forward them on to everybody that's here today. So, you know, this drill where you can get these resistance bands, and they come with a handle on them as well. This one's actually got a grip. It's a Stretch Perfect device. And what Martin's doing there really is using, this device here just to help with that, again, that shoulder stretch, help with that com going up, going into decel, and then getting his arms in the correct position. So that's these bands are really good for that. And with the handle as well, just placing the loop of it underneath the lead foot. So we'll watch Martin do this one. You can see he's really extending up.
So right arm retracting now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think he does this two-handed
Does
now.
this two-handed, yeah.
I think the other importance with that is obviously that everyone's body is different. And so say for me, a 50-year-old guy who doesn't have Martin's mobility, I'm not going to get the same range of motion. However, if I chipped away at that over a few weeks, I can get further than that. If I chipped away at this over a few weeks, I can start to lengthen it out a bit. So from a training perspective, it will actually increase your range of motion. And from a swinging perspective, it always goes back, longer hand path, and also then he's moving his body very well with that. Steve, you want the falling?
Yeah.
Through that.
So again, now we've got the reaching that kind of peak unweighting phase. So Martin going into that position there. So he's using that
I'll put it there, mate. Sorry.
the resistance band there with the handle, and then moving into that fall in. So, you know, effectively from this position here, shifting the pressure over to the lead side. So we're now beginning to increase force. And that's going to happen, we know, in three directions. There's forwards, there's to the side, and there's down, pushing him away from the, it's going to allow him to push away from the ground in the downswing. So we kind of got that up and then fall into position move.
So, for
Any questions?
oh yeah, sorry, any questions at that point?
Any questions up to this point where we are now? There are quite a few slides there. So basically all of the drills.
No questions in the chat so far, but anybody, if there's any questions that have popped in your mind, please ask, open the microphone, and there's not so many people online, so
Sure.
who's there?
So most people have seen this one. It's a standard, common kinematic sequence. Now, we do know that many other great players have slightly different sequences. So if you look at the graph at the bottom, the graph matches up with the avatars at the top. And we can see pelvis, thorax, arm and club. So there's this interaction that one part builds up on the next. So the pelvis gets some speed, decreases, thorax gets some speed, and then that goes out to the arm, and then eventually it goes out to that golf club. A couple of things with the sequencing becomes very important if you want to create good speed. So one thing I found out a long time ago in the long drive business, you better have a good golf swing as well as being a good athlete. So if I was working on long drive or I was doing it with a tour player, I would make sure they're obviously going to have good swings anyway, but I'd make sure their swings also very good as well, and the sequences are excellent. And I know, Hank, you use a bit of the ball, that would be big for you in the sequence, yeah?
Yeah.
What we sort of see here as well is, this will be an interesting one. The avatar at the top relates to the point where the peak speed is reached. Now, I've asked 10,000 people I teach, I say, when do you think the fastest point of your hands are? And 9,909 have told me at the ball. So one of the interesting things from a conceptual point of view is if you look at the peak speeds, and let's just take the arm for this case, you can see pelvic, thorax, and then you can see the arm peak speed. The arm peak speed is much earlier than people ever realise. As a pro, you might know this, but most amateurs have no idea of this fact. So if you were teaching someone and you wanted them to get their arms working fast, they need to know that the magic window is between P4 to about P5.5, which is just about here. That's where the hands are going to be working their quickest, and then we can see even those slow down. My last sort of point on this is I don't really believe in the passive idea of pelvic speed going on to thorax speed arm. The sequence is important, but I believe once the pelvis gets to its speed, I believe that the muscles around the rib cage here are actually speeding up the rotation of the upper body. I don't believe it's a passive pelvis thorax arm. And I believe the muscles of the shoulder complex later on are going to be working in that in speed. So for me, speed sequence is vital. I think your average person needs to know where their arm peak speed is, because if they're waiting, remember 0.2 of a second is all you've got on the way down. If they're waiting to get their arms going, and even from a coaching perspective, I know that many good players, most good players sort of suck their arm in and they have the feeling that their arm's being left behind. But and that scientifically could be proven as true. But I think from a teaching point of view, that 0.2 seconds is most amateurs probably want to get their arms going quicker than you think. And sometimes before they know it, they've gone down so slowly, they've just gone out with the rate of rotation of the body. There is no down element. So this is from Sasha McKenzie in Kinetics. If you want to look, he has some very good stuff online. Some you have to pay for, some is free on his Vimeo. So I've taken a graph, and this is talking about linear work, force along the hand path. And what we'll see is that the orange arrow sort of measures the direction of the force of the hands. The direction of the hands and the length of that. So we can see the length of his hand path. It actually is 1.12 meters there. I think the other interesting thing why this backs up, you can see the force on the path there in newtons and the work in joules there. But really, to make it simple, you can see the club head speed. A golfer between that sort of P4 and P6 Has already got 99.3. Now this player swung this club, I believe, about 115, between 115 and 120. So we can see how much speed is created in this very small window from the top to P6. And again, that backs up my sort of idea there that you don't want to be leaving it late to generate speed. And this is linear work, so this is only measuring the component of the hand motion down, not of the rotation of the club in an angular perspective. Now, this is one, we're not going to talk, so, sorry, I haven't got my glasses on, so I might need to move a bit closer. There's a very good fitness guy, probably my most respected guy is a guy called Alex Ehlert, E-H-L-E-R-T, who's doing some fantastic work on fitness. He's a scientist, strength and conditioning, working at a university, and he's probably bringing out the great stuff. Now, we're not going to talk through all of these. It would take a long time to go through, but with the recording, you can have a look at this. And basically, it's talking about linear work performed. And it's given us an idea of sort of fitness, flexibility, his background's fitness, so we can see linear work performed, average path in the direction, hand path length, the same as the chart earlier, swing coordination. And then we'll also see as it goes down, if you wonder what XF or XF, and that's X factor or X factor stretch. X factor is the backswing element, X factor stretch is the downswing element, which we can talk about a little bit. It's talking about flexibility, and it's really worth having a look at how that whole sort of framework comes together to generate speed, which hopefully at the end ends up with linear work performed. So there's a lot in that graph, really worth having a look at. And club head speed is obviously a bit at the bottom. I'm not going to read through the whole bits of those. You can do that in your own time there, yeah? So P4 to P5, maybe one of my bits we said earlier, I think I would work on. I thought it was interesting earlier when the question was asked, what do you work on mainly on bits? And I said P4, P5, and then sort of Steve almost said the same thing as it was changing direction there. We've never had that discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, the lead foot repositioning, we know that we are at this point here, max unweighted state. So 4.25, we're in free fall towards the ground. So we're at our lightest state, and then we'll move into our heaviest state, which we know from level 1 is at shaft vertical on the way down and around P5. So, you know, that from my perspective is that download phase, is that fast acceleration. And we know if the com gets up a little bit higher, if the hands are a bit higher, if the spine is zeroed out, we can really then start put flex into various segments and into the spine as the arms come down. So it all makes total sense from a ground reaction force standpoint that we see the guys, they are the fastest guys are the ones that are the lightest at 4.25, and they are the heaviest around, you know, shaft vertical, around P5 on the downswing.
And this is something, Steve, that I learned from you a few years ago now, was that it isn't so much, you see a lot of people practicing of getting their sort of this squat move and getting a lot of flexion. We see that from there, I'll put the hips and the knees change flex on the way down, they will gain it. But the very interesting thing, the nugget that Steve told me years ago was that it's not the depth of the squat, which I see people practicing all the time, it's the speed of the squat. And then we're looking at long drive. Many long drive guys don't drop that much, they just drop really fast. So as Steve was saying there, as you're unweighting, it's not the depth of the drop, Steve, it's the speed of the drop.
Speed of the drop, absolutely. So it's back to the acceleration piece of that. So, you know, the guys that are the fastest, they're getting the most unweighted. So we see anything from 48% of their weight unweighted state, where tall players are getting around sort of 70. So it's a big difference there. And then tall players are creating anything at heavier states, so push away from the ground as a percentage of body weight, they're getting anything from 170 to around 200% as a percentage of body weight.
And from a poor amateur's point of view, how much weight do you say they're losing on the way down?
So they're losing, lucky if they're losing 10%, so they get to around 90.
As opposed to 60.
Opposed to 60, anything from 40 to 48 with a long driver up to, you know, into the 70s with a tall player. But the timings of it is so critical. I see so many amateurs, and I think there's a lot of information out there. It's a minefield, it's a rabbit hole when they start investigating ground reaction forces, because everyone talks about creating more force, but you can't find anything about force timings. So that point where maximum vertical force on the downswing, shaft vertical, everyone's trying to pour in and get their verticals up. But the problem is then they're actually creating a bigger problem because it was actually when they peaked it that was the problem in the first place. So they've got poor ground reaction force from a timing perspective, not from a peak amount. So a lot of the time for amateurs, I see peak verticals from 6 or even later. Now, if we think that force precedes motion, if peak vertical through the lead side is at 6, now from an iron and maybe a wedge perspective, I can keep gliding with medial laterals and kind of drag and lean and get my attack angle low point and match it up with the deep plane with the swing direction. That would be no problem at all. But from an angular perspective, when we're starting to get the rotation about the club, and if we want to get force up the grip end, so that when we talk about it later, that parametric acceleration. So if I'm going to get this club head to go towards the ground, I need to pull up on the grip, right? I need vertical force on point, on time, not massive amounts of it, but I need to have it here because this is going to help me then create that up through that left side, displace the lead side, both hip, shoulder. We talk about shoulder travel later on. So I can effectively get this. And you can hear what I've done to the lag popper there. I've got the noise down the bottom.
From angle.
Now, I don't need that for iron and I don't need it for wedge because I can glide and I can drive and I can drag. So, you know, it's very, very important from those. And we had one yesterday, an example, a young lad that was swinging around 88 to 90 with his 7 iron, but was only getting 103 with a driver. Now, when we do the calculation, and he should be, I mean, this is a +1 handicap golfer, so swinging tour average roughly, and for his age, well up there with his 7 iron, but couldn't get it out to the club with the driver. And we know from the calculation that should translate from 88 to 90 up to about, he should be really delivering 113 with the driver. And all we worked on then is this, but from if I measured him, we would know he would have late verticals, which is then not, it's reducing the amount of Z-axis pull on the club. He's getting that up towards his body, angular movement.
Exactly.
Sorry, can I interrupt? There's one question concerning the P1 to P4. So before, so the question is right knee flex from P1 to P4 increasing, same straightens.
I know what the gears average. So the relativity gears. So the average, I can tell you that the 20% knee flex is the average. The left one goes to 40, and this one from here loses about, so that doubles, and this one goes from about 20 to 15 to 10 to give you a number. I know it's very trendy at the moment to straighten your leg quite a lot, and that would take out Jack Nicklaus and others who tend to keep it. So we know gears tour average is they both start about 20. This one goes to 40. This one pulls back and loses between 5 and 10, I believe, is the gears average.
Okay, Hank, answer that one.
Yeah, probably.
So motion travel of the lead shoulder, which I just touched on there then.
Yeah, so then from my perspective, from a, how do you apply linear force onto the club handle? So if I can grab that. So how would you apply linear force? What's making this force move the club down here? Certainly for me, there's sort of 3 major elements from a swing perspective. The travel of your left shoulder in space would have a bearing on this. And as I move this forward, you can see it starts to move my upper arm both forward and slightly down. And it's partly why if you had a very high swing here, the motion of moving your left shoulder forward would accrue more speed into the left arm. So left shoulder travel. Now, you could train that from a sequence and a speed perspective by throwing frisbees. Hank, you call them frisbees over there?
Yep.
Just checking,
Yeah.
So from that perspective here, it was good. But now from what I said earlier, this is training the left arm in abduction, not the vertical, but it does give you a good sense of sequence of timing and how the left shoulder can put speed on this and how it affects the position of the left shoulder. The second part of this is that the right arm. So if you think that I could have if you swung it one-handed or two-handed, you could always swing it faster with 2 hands than one to a certain amount. If you're thinking about my left arm here and I'm going to try and get some speed in it, if I could use my right arm to assist the throwing of my left arm, that would make it go faster. So what we'll see there is that the right arm adducting, just moving down towards the front of my body, and therefore its ability to move this down here should be able to help you to speed this up. And we know from gears as well that that right arm would slightly straighten. I don't believe at this time this has actually been measured in any way from a strain gauge on the grip, but from my perspective, this makes a difference. And the third thing is your shoulder complexes, which can, and your lats in pulling down, which is why you see a lot of fitness guys and a lot of long drive guys would work on throwing med balls from this position here downwards. And as I said, this is a fantastic exercise, but you don't want the bouncy med ball. But that's why you see a lot of guys or girls here throwing med balls to the right of them to try and increase the strength of their arms moving downwards there. The next part on that, low moment of inertia to speed up rotation. Now, a moment of inertia is the concept that, say I was an ice skater, that if I put my arms out here, I'm very difficult to rotate. And if I put my arms in, I can rotate much quicker. What we know from 3D data, so the position of adduction of the left arm here, it varies person to person. Some have it less, some have it more. We know with powerful players, they move their chest into their arm or vice versa. So this left arm is pulled across. This will give me a smaller moment of inertia that would allow me to rotate quicker. But secondary as well for me, that the movement of this left arm across gives me a lovely stretch across here and both these shoulders that I can use later on in the downswing. If we look at the hand path at this point, and this sort of goes back to what we were saying earlier about it being loaded in two phases. If you really look at great hand paths at this point, they tend to go out a little bit. Then they have this big vertical drop bit downwards before they start their journey abruptly up and around. And we know from looking at powerful players, the shape of the hand path gets curved more abruptly with a driver at this point to produce speed. So I put hand path is more vertical at this stage. So I'm using more of my elevation depression motion there, as opposed to my adduction abduction. That will come in a little bit later. And then Steve, your bit on the forces there.
Yes, we know from obviously from the level 1 class that anterior posterior force, it needs to be 1.5 to 2 times greater through the lead foot. So I'm going to use the leaderboard here just as a, to demonstrate this. So that kind of download phase, what we've got is, we're increasing pressure, COP shifting past the center of mass over towards the lead side, but it's not just a down, it's a forwards and it's a towards target move. So we take the forwards bit back to the clock card. And again, we've got that, the clock card here. So if you have one of these, I'm not sponsored by Amazon, but it's an Amazon box. You actually just put all of the digits of the clock. So you put this under foot slider, nice easy way of just demonstrating it for the client as well. So we are trying to create a force in that direction. I always use the analogy, if I gave them a pair of shoes, a shoe under their left on their left foot that was 3 times bigger, and they were to slide the foot to the end of the shoe. So with the leaderboard here, what we can demonstrate then is that forward push, okay, of the foot in that direction. So then I've got my reaction, I'm pushed up against the bar, and then that's going to give me the ability to create that overhead horizontal plane torque, which we know is ultimately going to give us the ability to turn the pelvis horizontally, get it open.
Yeah, so we look at the drills on the right hand side there. One of my favorites, this actually is a dedicated tail, but you can make your own. I originally did this with just a towel that you can take around the club, and we call it the throw off drill. But basically from here, what I'm trying to do is I can't do it, but I'm trying to throw the club off here. This does many great things. You can see my left shoulder reacting properly, me trying to move my arms down. And from here, we can also see it works from an angular perspective. So the club's trying to sort of jackknife against me and break down, but my hands are having to work very well to keep this away. It's a brilliant exercise. And once you've also got the knowledge that we're trying to throw it off in this phase between P4 and P5, that's when you can start to do it. And not only is this a very good drill from a technique perspective, as in good shoulder movement, good arm movement from the right side as well, and allowing those forces to sit nicely through the grip. If we're not doing a gym seminar today, but from a fitness point of view, is I've worked with the guys with this for quite a while, and if they do it long enough, they're starting to get stronger faster. So we're building muscles at the range there as opposed to the gym.
And I've got there, just literally just got a bag towel, just tied it to the bottom of the shaft there. And what you can do is just extend the length of the towel to make it, you know, a heavier resistance, or even kind of just be careful where you are, but even wet the towel to make it heavier as well. So that's just using, you know, tools, their own club, their own bag towel to create some resistance to enable them to do that, create that throw off drill.
And again here, the next one says landing drill, and for me, I think of landing of this point as the person, as Steve says, drops their weight, moves down into this club, and this for me is a really good exercise. Now, a few people have asked me what this is. It's actually a skills club that I bought as a tempo, which I don't particularly like, and I've turned it upside down, so it's not no magic a training aid you've never seen, but I'm just using it the wrong way round. And what we're going to do here, if we split the hands up, and the splitting the hands up also helps really good sort of back arm movement. I'm going to get it to the point when I stamp down, and I'm going to try and make the shaft bend so much, I'm almost trying to make it hit the floor. Now, in doing this with Steve, we can see really fast hip motion dropping, which we talked about, big peaks under the left foot, but also from my perspective and the upper body, it gets really good positions. How would that come up on your force plate, Steve, that drill?
Yeah, well, I mean, I use that quite a lot. When I see juniors and sort of teenage golfers, quite a lot of them create kind of early, just in case that flies off, they create early peaks in their verticals. So, you know, we've got somebody that's getting a peak, you know, up here. So then by the time they get to impact, they, you know, their elevation, how much they push their pelvis away from the ground, it's going to create an issue, you know, an issue with vertical strike point on the face. So I tend to, with this one, try and get them to feel that they're actually creating a peak later. So then I'm going to go, right, I'm going to have that down at 6 now. So from top to 6, just really kind of working more on that just to get that peak later. And it's back to that timings, the all important timings with this. You really have to be on point. You can't be earlier. You know, some skilled golfers deal with earlier, but if you're later, there's only specific shots that you can play. You are not getting speed out to the club with driver, and you are not optimizing it.
And then the last bit there is the sort of leaderboard.
Yeah, leaderboard, done that one. So we had the foot slider there. So you use that, either the foot slider is the clock card, the leaderboard is out. You can twist it out to 11 o'clock. You can have it at 12. Again, for different golfers, where are you trying to get them to push? So just sliding that board forwards, holding it into position, get into that shaft vertical. And then what I let them do is kind of from that point, I kind of worked, I've used this drill a lot and adapted it and adjusted it a lot over the years now. But I kind of get up to the top, I drive forwards, I've got good pressure under the lead foot. It's the forefoot of the foot that the pressure's under, not the mid or even the hind. So we are looking at getting it across the balls of the feet, the metatarsal heads. So we get into that position there. And then from that, as they release the club into impact, I kind of let the board just go back. So don't let them hold the board in and try and push. Let the board go back. So we've got the reaction from the ground, which is that anterior toe to heel reaction force.
Well, you got your launch pad there, and
A
a mini hedgehog, by the way, if you wonder what that is, it's actually a sort of like half a ball with spikes on it that you can stand on. I haven't got one to show you, but that's what it is.
So this is basically a pool noodle chopped up like we did on the level 1 there. So a 3-inch piece of pool noodle cut into half. I mean, I was using tennis balls chopped up for years. Your pool noodle is great. You can use force pedals. But yeah, really great training aid. And again, you're just placing that under the lead foot. So really just the simplicity of that training aid. Right, okay, pushing it down. And I don't mind the heel being off the ground at this point. We know that the foot's higher anyway because of the pad being underneath it. I don't mind. I certainly don't want them, because you'll get them, oh, I should be putting pressure through my heel. We're not putting pressure through the hind foot. If you trying to jump off your heels versus jumping off your toes, you're going to jump much higher. So we get higher peaks. So they're having that underneath the metatarsal heads of the foot there, the forefoot of the foot, so they can apply pressure to that part to then create that motion, which is going to displace the lead side.
I think we've got a couple of videos now to come up, yeah?
Yeah. Any questions, Hank?
One question, the frisbee drill. I think you missed that one.
I only didn't say that because I sort of covered it earlier, Hank. Yeah,
Okay.
so I did see it just because I mentioned it a bit before. It's actually a good drill. Kids love it as well. If you were having doing a kids session, but it's a very good drill, as we said earlier, for stepping in, unwinding, getting speed out. Almost feel like you're catapulting your left arm off your chest, or therefore your active pivot, the way your body movement is going to throw it. And you'll generally find, obviously, with really big hitters, they're really good at throwing frisbees. So it's a bit of fun for the kids, but it gives you a nice idea of sequence, moving in, but it does get your left arm to work in the range of abduction, not the vertical, but it will get some feeling of getting that out to the left hand. And even if you did it with like an alignment rod and one-handed, a similar feel.
I use these dog frisbees because actually they're flexible, so they're super cool as well. So rather than using your conventional plastic frisbee, use these kind of sort of almost rubber style dog frisbees, which are much more flexible and they don't break. So I use them as foot sliders, putting under the foot. So they've got kind of multiple uses. They show them center of mass moving. I get them turning, tilting, creating frontal face on talk as well. So they're quite cool. So yeah. Okay with that, Hank? Any other questions in the group?
One question from me is the power source and left hand or left arm. Well, there's lots of kind of misconceptions with people, but one question is that should the left arm be straight, and what would you like to kind of like see in the bend of the elbow and when you teach left hand speed?
Yeah, I think tour average elbow bend is 6 degrees from the 180. I think that's about right, Hank. I don't think they've ever measured anyone with a straight left arm, but on the lesson tee every day someone will mention that. I know a few long drive guys for a fuller range of motion will bend. Really the genius in doing it, if you want to get it bent for a little bit more speed, you want to get it back out straight without casting the club out. So then we'll look at teaching senior golfers. If you were teaching a senior golfer, you might well add in some of those. You might add in little close stance, little splayed right foot, little freer pivot with the left heel coming up, and certainly a little bit of arm bend there. So I don't believe anyone too has ever been measured with a straight left arm or hyperextended. There's always a little bend. I think you can play around with the bend depending on the standard of player and of their body, where they are in their life at that point.
Cheers.
Okay, good. Shall we?
I think there's videos to do with this.
We do the videos with this.
Yeah,
and then we'll take a break. Yeah, because we're 11:30. Is that good, Hank? We do a break after the videos.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so this for me becomes very important. There's been lots of studies done on this. Michael Jacobs, Brian Manzella done it. They call it their hub path. The hand path for me is vital. So Dustin Johnson, obviously, you can see this sort of slight outward motion as you follow the red line with the white dots down. As it moves down, it works outwards. Then you've got that huge vertical motion. He's got that huge long hand path that he's moving those hands down vertically more at this stage than he is off his chest. You can see even in picture sort of 2-3, his left arm still quite adducted. So the plane of motion. Now, this becomes very important as you're able to get the shape of your hands correctly in both getting speed to the driver, but also the point Steve was saying earlier about, you know, if you ever teach someone who can swing a 7-iron fast, but they can't get any speed out to their driver, sort of the hand shape and then what they can do in releasing the shaft later becomes very important. So I would very often draw that line with someone I'm teaching. We know that the hand path doesn't look anything like that for an iron. It has a much more sort of direct route to the ball, and certainly in pitching. So I would be drawing that. That becomes very important for me. Number one at this point, because of the linear work, that the hand's moving downwards. And as it starts to bend at the bottom, then we can start to do a load more angular work at that point, which we'll go into a little bit later. So the guy on the left there, that's Joe Miller, a two-time world long drive champion. Now that is a strong man. Now, because of his strength, you could see the tail that I've got on him, resistance is huge, yeah? Now, I wouldn't be putting a lady on that tail. She'd still be trying to move it down now about a year later. So you have to put the size of the tail, as Steve said, he was wetting the tail. But that's what, and actually talking about the left arm, Joe isn't a very flexible man. He's a very strong man, so he has his left arm quite bent at the top. But you see by P5, with any real big hitters or the tour guys who've got bent arms, they've normally got rid of a lot of that bend by P5 without the loss of wrist cop. And actually, on a day-to-day basis, it's quite a good exercise for people to cast it a little bit. But what we can see is Joe's face there for a man of that strength, how hard he's having to try and work to try and move that off. And he's having to try and work early. He's trying to get the hands working very, very swiftly. It's a very good device also for producing great hand paths. So what Joe's having to do, if you looked at his hands, which are quite upright, his hands are further away from the target at P5 than they were at the top, despite the fact that he's moved forward. So he's getting this huge hand path out and down in the first phase, but you can see in his face the force he's having to put on that. And Steve, that's one of mine and your students to the right there.
It is. This is going to turn sideways.
It's going to go sideways.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's going to go because this is done on an iPhone, and the codecs on this computer is just going to fry it, so it's going to turn around.
Okay.
But we'll play it again.
And this is just more in real life. Now, Todd here, he won the English amateur or the British amateur? English amateur.
Yeah.
So a high-level player. He's been a bit of a student. Steve's done an awful lot of work with him, and he's got his swing speed up from 108 to 122. Is that right?
122 now, yeah, absolutely.
And so therefore, you can see a long driver opposed to an elite player.
Com acceleration down. So this is the that kind of going into maximum acceleration down. So just play this through and explain that.
What we can see here is Martin's using the same device I've got with a split hand grip, and he's using that, so that's a skills club the wrong way round, and he's banging. Now, because he's 5 times stronger than me, he's got a head cover and he's got a towel on it, so he's having to work much harder to get to that point. So basically the gadget that we've used, I've given it a Martin touch because I've added more resistance because he's bigger and stronger than me.
So com acceleration down, we know the importance of not the amount, okay, it's how quick, how fast you can accelerate that down. So we add that resistance to create much more acceleration. Very important. Okay, good. Ready to go. Should we go into?
What's the next picture? Then we need P6, P. So is that the next one's Martin?
Yeah. So yeah, take a
Where
break
we are?
now. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where we are. Excellent, Hank. Should we take a break now before we move into P5 and through?
Yeah, that's good. How long? 5 minutes or?
Can we have a? We're out in the middle of a field, quite a distance away, so we got to wander back to the clubhouse. So if we could have sort of 10, 15 minutes, that'd be great.
Yeah,
It'd be
just
good.
tell me how long you need. So I'll just.
15 minutes. So we come back now at 11:50.
Yeah.
11:50 our time. You're 2 hours ahead, so 1:50 your time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you then.
Oh, perfect. That's brilliant. It's automated. Hank, let us know. We're all ready to go. You're our end.
Yeah. Everybody's here, so just let's go and continue.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So again, so we're now P5, P6. And if I was teaching, you know, the person might be swinging well to this point, so then I don't like this part, so then I would break it down into these little segments. So we talked about the motion of the left arm at this point. We can see that it's mainly been the vertical element. So and we know that for really good players, the lead arm on the way down, the adduction number, which is whether it's out or more across your chest, varies player to player, good players as well, yeah? But it doesn't very much on the way down. So we've got this movement of it stretching back across, so it's become more adducted or more across my chest. And so at this point, after the vertical element, the hands then move away. And I would view this myself as measuring the distance sort of between my hands and my right shoulder. So if you could have this sort of imaginary, it's not easy in 2D, but imaginary. It's now when my hands really start to separate away from my shoulder. So the lead arm now starts to release in 2 planes. So it's now starting to get away from my right shoulder, and it's now starting to get going forward as well as downwards. So that's a really big part of starting to bend that hand path around, which we'll talk about in a second from that. From there, we'll go on to that left side display. That's you there, Steve.
Yeah, so I mean that just fits in with exactly what I measure. So we know if we've got peak verticals at shaft vertical on the way down, okay, forces proceed in motion. So in coming into impact now, the result, we've got torque, we've got frontal plane torque, the ability to tilt. Okay, so force up through that left side. that force vector away from the center of mass. We've created this early downswing. We've peaked it around this point here. This force, this torque, displacing of the lead side, the lead side of the pelvis going up, and then how that's affecting the displacement of the lead shoulder. Effectively, you know, what we're getting there in that position from that is allowing us to ultimately then start to get that force up the axis or Z axis of the shaft.
Yeah, so from that point of view, from what I'd expect to see above the ground, so we're going to see probably some leg extension, some left side of the pelvic rise, my left side of my rib cage start to extend, and my clavicle here, my shoulder starting to move up. And one of the major power sources from P5 onwards here is the movement of the left shoulder back, up and around. Now, pros do it, long drivers are the best in the world at doing it, but pros do it generally quite well. But your average amateur, it either doesn't move at all, just stays, boom, God, doesn't move whatsoever, or from there it hardly moves around. Left shoulder movement from here, up, back and around. And obviously we've got the muscular work going on here as well, is a major source. We've been able to get some speed out into the club, and it starts to now do the magic in bringing that hand path a little bit more up and around. So it's gone down, out, down, reached its bottom position. Now it starts to go upwards. Now, back to the sort of the angular work there with the leg popper there. So the linear work, we've got loads of linear work here. My hands now are going to get to about P5 point. That's about the position they'll slow down. And now I want to get speed out to this club. So this here a little bit is why this now comes back in. So as I swing it down, you can now start to see me getting speed out this end. And then if I start to move it from here, this moving up, this applies this force, as Steve said, where the actual force on the handle should be this way, and that speeds the motion down. And this is where we can start to get all that accrued power that was happening earlier out into the golf club. So where it says the hand path starts to bend, this is a massive part of the ground, or as Steve says, working the muscles against that ground, then starting to elevate the left side, left shoulder up, back and around. And you can see that how that then starts to change the shape of my hands coming into the ball. The continuing hand speed from P5 to P6 is helped by the shoulder girdle muscle. So we'll see that my shoulders here, and there's a good drill after this with the fan, are really working that club to continue its motion past my body and through.
And then the drills exercises, so you've got the
we'll do lead foot one, mate.
Yeah, lead foot. So effectively we use the pull needle, the launch pad there, place it under the lead foot. I think that's really for this, what club we can use, totally up to you, what club you want to use here. But I tend to kind of with this just exaggerate things. So I'm going to move center of mass, I'm going to move com left, I'm going to move COP left just for this drill. It will be different for different golfers, different equipment, different, attack angles, different, release patterns of the club through the ball. So from here, I'm going to load up. I've got this closed stance. This is one of the drills on the level 1. And then from here, I want to get the pop. We've got that happening. And I'm going to jump. I'm going to get the lead foot off the ground. So really that forcing, creating this up and away movement, the lift, the elevation of the pelvis, and the displacement again of that lead side. So nice, simple drill really we can get. And then we can, with something like the lag popper, then we can really then start to hear that pop and release there as we've created that jump move and started to displace that lead side.
What we're sort of talking about here, and there'll be some videos coming up of how we're going to train that. So what video's up there next, please, Steve?
Acceleration up. Okay. So again, it's that lead pushing away from the ground. So that's the lead jump drill.
Video plays, Steve.
Yeah. So he's got the towel. Yeah.
So when Martin first come to see me, for a man that was that fast, he had not great vertical force out of his left foot, quite low for a long drive guy, Steve.
Yeah.
And his left shoulder position really wasn't very good. He really stalled out when he here stopped moving. So we use this drill again. He's got a bigger tail than I am because he's stronger than me. This is a winner, this drill. So again, I've got this skills thing, but I've got it the wrong way around. I've got my tail on it. Two things happen as you try and swing this really fast. Your pelvis will start to rise. Fantastically shoulder motion upwards. And a little bit worried of hitting the ground. It tends to get you to raise a little bit. So brilliant, brilliant exercise to train that left shoulder, get the pelvis lifting, get that left leg to move up a little bit. And this is, so as we're training those hands to move, this is a fan. Obviously, again, you can buy fans. This is a giant one because of the man's a giant. You can buy much smaller ones than this. And what he's really working here is the motion of the hands and going towards the target and the muscles required to carry on that movement. So you've got this accrued speed building up. He's now going to try and keep that moving. And as you watch him swing this, he's just going to try and move this through the air. Again, you don't need a fan this big. It's just the person who's swinging it. You can buy very much smaller fans than this, or you can actually buy attachments that go on your shaft like parachutes. And he's just working it through this small area here. And this really is a good workout. And 6 of these really does time me out just moving forward. He's just working through that small area through the shot. You can see how well his feet work here from a driver perspective, just in response to the gadget he's using, not really a thought of it. See the first motion down. You can really see him now use those muscles and those shoulder muscles to continue. That's a lot of hard work trying to move that through the ball, yeah? Actually, quite a good nice exercise for people that tend to release it a little bit early as well from another factor not related so much to speed.
So that's the lead side extremes. Yeah, that's the jump drill then. So we just play this through.
Pelvic elevation, Steve, which is a must for speed. This is the best on it.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're seeing it obviously from the ball 3D system here. So with Martin's data that we've got now and Joe's data, so 80 centimeters per second of pelvis rise. You know, when we compare that to, you know, amateur golfers and even aspiring long drivers dropping down to less than 40. So these guys have got twice the amount of lift. So this drill coming back to that kind of just really getting the emphasis through peak timings, okay, back to that timings, it must be shaft vertical. If we get it at shaft vertical, then we know that we're going to have movement of the pelvis up and displacement of the lead side. So watching Martin do this drill here, you know, really just shows how extreme it is. And he's doing it with the iron as well. So and from his sound effects, you can certainly hear the intent and effort.
Sorry, I missed a point there, that the exercise I showed you with the skills thing with the towel on it and Martin swinging from here, what you'll actually see, could you play that video to the left, please, yeah?
Yeah.
So I would call this the Hideki drill. So like Matsuyama, he's stopping at the top. And what he's doing, I would do this 2 ways. He's doing this with the retracted right foot drill. But I'd actually get people to hit shots for me. You'd be amazed. So you get them here, talking about priming, I get them stamping. And then I'd get them to hit as hard as they could from that position. Now, I know that, say you had someone who could swing at 110, they can almost get to 103 from that position, which is amazing because they've got no backswing or downswing. But you do this with a person who's poor from here, and you get this exercise, so P5, stomp, 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 kill it. It creates really great movement from a part of the swing. And as I've always done it, I've picked a bit. So if they're no good at that area, I'll start them. Do the Hideki, start from there, prime it, slam it, you'll get magic movement from that perspective. So you can break the swing into segments and work in the speed elements of them.
So going through that really, I mean, look, we've obviously got different training aids here, but they're quite similar with that come up, but we've got a square stance versus the closed stance versus a bias left. COM and COP obviously then, because COM has shifted the COP more over to the lead side. So you're just really just giving just a bit more of an extreme way of feeling that push up through the left side.
Yeah, and say for someone the super speed sticks. The speed training has been a bit of a dark art for about 20 years. Super speed is giving people like a little window and insight into how they train it. again, if I was doing that and I had a speed stick, I might do that with a speed stick to make it really fast as well. So not just taking their protocols for training. I would probably use the light one there. And what I would do is I would use that drill and then try and get it moving even quicker. So very often with the training aids like super speed, I would use that a little bit as a part of the technique, not just in the speed training part of it as well.
And we know that what the light super speed stick is what 19% lighter than a standard driver.
No, more than 10. So that if you do ever make your own weighted ones, you don't want them much more than 10% lighter or heavier. Otherwise, the kinematic sequence goes out the window. So when I see people coming in with an alignment rod, it's a waste of time. You know, they might be able to make a good noise, but it throws everything out a little bit. And also, if it was too heavy, a similar way with that. So we're going to talk probably a little bit about some training aids later. So we'll go through these as power elements, and there's no drills bit to the right, but we can talk through what I do. Now, you could do a whole seminar on wrists. You could, with hack motion, which are measuring lots of different motions from Dustin Johnson's flexion to extension. Main power source coming down radial to ulnar, but it's not really about wrist. It's just the fact that your wrists are a huge power supply. I said earlier that the muscles in the wrists aren't that strong, but the forces and torques going on it are very strong now, or very powerful. So if we sort of took this device here, this is how I would train this. I'd get a person into this position. The hands have reached peak speed, P5.5. Now I've got to get the speed out the end, and I'd hammer this around, And I said I've actually made a few of these with like a toilet roll here, put it on someone's driver. I'm being silly to get the speed. The noise is much better on this, but you can make something that's going to do this. This is a winner because you can see now everything I've got to go up and now put it out to the other end. So don't need to get too detailed here. And obviously my hands, my wrists, the muscles aren't huge on them, but you can see what I'm doing to try and get speed out to the other end. And most people you teach don't have that. We could do if I could borrow that seat there. Steve, if you get some players who can't get any speed out to the club, I quite like the Americans where they learn baseball off this high rubber tee. And if you got them to sit here and hit shots off it, I won't get equipment there, they can't, a lot of players, get any speed at all. They don't know how to use their hands to get speed out to the end of the club. So stuff like this just teaches the player. We did that with a young man yesterday. He didn't know how to get speed out to his driver. He knew how to get out to his iron, but not out to his driver at all.
On the reference earlier,
Okay, so hold that please, Steve. So from that point, the right pec at this point plays. I could hold that band there, please. The right pec, they're just going to get Steve to hold this band. I've actually got something at my place of work which has got a grip on it. The right pec plays a part in allowing the hand to continue to move past the body. So I can feel this clenching as I'm trying to continue to keep my arms moving with the club through the ball. So while training it, and I would actually have it, as I say, I've got one of these small bands with a club on it to get the feeling of that moving across from there. Now, the arms moving quicker than the rotating body. Now, a lot of wedge practice, a lot of guys put towels under their arms so that they can sync the speed of the arms with the body's rotation, but you don't really want to do that if you're really trying to hit it very fast. Your arms want to work almost faster than the rate of the rotating body. So you want more speed out of it. So you don't want them working together. You will have a feeling of movement. And that's why I used the word catapult earlier. It doesn't quite work like this, but the idea is correct, is that if you can move your pivot correctly and you felt like it catapulted your arms off your body, it would give that person quite a nice feeling of moving the arms quicker than the rotating body. We could take that Frisbee drill back into that as well, yeah? Now, up until this point, sorry, I haven't written that quite correctly. The downward component of the hands more important than at this stage in the abduction. So I've actually got that the wrong way around. So we've made the downward component. I must change that to from here, and now the arms are now going to work now more across the body from there. So I've got that the wrong way around. Apologies, yeah. So that sense now that you've made the big vertical component, my hands have stayed the same distance from the shoulders. I've rotated from about here. They start to separate. Great feeling there of your hands working away. Then they're going to work more across my body at that point. This one, right lateral bend can help. So if we were sort of throwing stones or moving it down, my right side moving down could potentially help the speed of my arm. And the reason I'm saying for a lot of players that would help them, I do know there's a few long drivers who don't use it at all. They tend to just throw it brilliantly from there. So for a lot of people, it can help, but not for everybody, yeah? And this is a big one for me from a teaching perspective, is that very fast hips are only any good if they're backed up by very fast shoulders. So a lot of people talk to me about they're obsessed by hip speed, yeah? You want your shoulders, we could see from that the graph earlier on the kinematic sequence, that your shoulder speed should outreach your peak speed. And from about P 4.5 going forward, the speed of those shoulders overtakes it and the distance traveled till they finally catch up. So I would always say to someone, don't forget, you can have fast hips, but make sure they're only any good if you back them up with fast shoulders. Okay, so up until this point, we've sort of been talking about lead arm speed, how that becomes important. So this graph has two things. It's starting to talk about the graph on the right is angular work. You can see that arrow where the club's been rotated around that imaginary axis in space. This is a Sasha McKenzie graph again. We can see from that perspective, the club head speed's been built up and it's moved around. You can see the angular work. It's starting now to get to the point where we're going to throw the speed out to the club. But the graph on the left is a sequence of Rory McIlroy on the left and JB Holmes on the right. So typical of those graphs, the red line would be the hips, the green line's thorax, blue's the lead arm, and the gold is the club. So that classic sequence. Now, you can see that the club head speed is identical, but the graphs below are different. So Rory's on the left, you can see his hip speed. We know he's got some of the fastest hips in the world, faster than many long drive guys. We know that he's got the quick rotating chest. And if you look at the blue graph in particular, it's higher than JB Holmes' graph to the right. So we see that McIlroy's got slightly faster hands than JB Holmes has, but JB Holmes can accelerate the club faster. Now, because of most of the work being done on that is inverse dynamics, which is calculations, we don't really know anatomically how that happens. We don't actually know how he gets those forces to make the shaft work quicker. And that goes back to me. And got the leg proper there, please. Two things I would do, and what I did it with the lad yesterday, really simple stuff. I'd get them to, I can't swing here because of the door, I'd get them to swish the shaft through the air, and I'd teach the person to learn how to get noise out to noise out to the club head, and I'd do loads of work with this leg popper. And actually, you can measure these things as well. So what we can do is we can measure this on a PRGR. So the reason I like PRGR is it measures practice swings. A TrackMan won't pick this up because I'm not hitting a ball. And then I can measure that. And Steve, if you've got another gadget there for us, please, mate. Thank you, mate. So if you haven't seen, you can make these at home. These are called jet sticks. Now, what they are is a ball on the end. Now, the amount of chains on this, so this has got 1, 2, 3. Mine's got 4 generally because I tend to teach men along drivers. So you can add the chain for extra weight. It's also a fantastic drill and can be measured on PRGRs in getting speed out to the golf club here. Is that as you swing it back, it helps for 2 ways. It helps with angular motion. So number one, this is keeping the shaft back from going out. So you want the shaft to be rotating this way at this point. Once it goes down and the ball catches up, obviously I've got no speed through it at the moment, it then gets you to fling out. Now, unusual for some training aids, this is to be done at full speed and full pelt. And again, I can measure that on a PRGR and measure it. It goes fast because the ball's obviously going really fast at the end. And then you can track your progress with that. So some really good ways to get speed out to the club. So Rory's got a faster left arm, but JB Holmes can accelerate the shaft quicker. And if you work on both of those, you'll get faster. Okay, Steve?
Yeah.
What have we got next?
Any questions, Hank, on this?
What a surprise, nothing.
Have you got any questions, Hank?
Well, I'm sure if you're coming with P7, but with many times like people practicing speed with speed sticks or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then when they get their actual club, they slow down because the club face is doing whatever. So they kind of, when they react to wearing the club face, they lose speed. Do you have any insights on that, or is it coming up next?
It's coming in a minute, Hank.
We're going to move it there. But this all kind of makes sense with the linear and angular work with this then, and the timings of it, the priority. Okay.
So, next screen there.
Right, so it's back.
So this is Cameron Champ. Now, an interesting one with Champ, to be honest. He doesn't exhibit some of the sort of the big up elements of jumping with his feet. And he's got this, what Sean Foley calls this slingshot motion. But really, I want you to sort of notice here. Yeah, I meant almost the jumping up there a bit. Steve's he's on his feet already there. So what the point of this picture actually is, you go through the phases of 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that the right elbow position of Champ in P2 coming in slightly behind his hip. He's then moved beyond his body's rate of rotation here through the shot. So his elbow's got way beyond the speed of his hip. And this was to illustrate that his arms are working much quicker than the speed of his rotating body. If you've got someone really slow here, their right elbow would almost look as though it stays at the same speed. There's no add-on to that motion.
Interestingly, from my perspective, if we look at his Cameron's lead heel there, does it ever get planted? P2, position slide 2 there, or picture 2, heels still off the ground. Picture 3, heels more off the ground. Picture 4, heels still off the ground. So back to that point of where the pressure is, the golfer, you know, he may not be showing that he's got, you know, very high verticals, which I believe, I understand that he doesn't have high verticals. He times them very well, very important. But we know he's very, very efficient in where that vertical force is being, that pressure is being applied to his foot. And there is no doubt there that is being applied to the metatarsal heads of the toes there. So the ball of the left, of the lead foot across the balls of the feet there, you can quite clearly see that. So from my perspective, that is an incredibly efficient way of creating pressure and push up through the lead side. Okay, P7.
Okay, so left arm's going to be adducting to a certain amount here. We know sometimes with really fast players, as they throw the club out, it can slow the segment above down a little bit. But now the left arm is stopped, really, its downward movement is coming across. The amount of abduction off the chest might vary between, and sometimes you see some ladies a bit more that way, but that's now mainly abducting instead of going across. Parametric acceleration. Have we got the diagram for that, Steve?
We have, yeah, go forward one.
Yeah. Now, this is something that ladies often use. Every long drive, man or woman use, but potentially does have speed, but maybe not enough to make it worth it. And what it really means, if you look at the green dots of the hub path at this point, they're taking a very natural route down, they're curving, they're starting to go upwards. But there is a potential to pull it higher. This pull could come from jumping off your feet. We know every long drive and guide it's right up off the floor, huge movement of the shoulder upwards. It adds about 5% potential for speed. In the long drive business, that's massive. That's why they're all doing it. On tour, that might not mean as much. And it's worth experiments. So Lexi Thompson gets right up onto her toes, Steve, yeah, as she moves through this. So there is some potential, but I see a lot of people talking about it. The only problem with trying that a little bit might be them trying to hit the middle of the face. Don't confuse this as well. A few other people confused it. It's not the arc of the hands going upwards. That's normal. It's an exaggerated pull at the last minute, as Steve explained earlier, to add speed. So we can go back to those 2 frames earlier, please, Steve. So the reason I put discuss, it's a power element, but does it work? Okay, so as it's moving up the shaft, does it actually something that's worthwhile trying? Possibly, possibly not. Secondly, this is what I was talking about earlier, continuing to rotate the upper torso very fast through the late downswing and early follow through allows the arms and release club to use their game. Basically from that, if your shoulders aren't moving after the hips, it's really difficult to keep that speed and momentum going. And if you stall on it and it all stops moving, it's tough to get speed out to the other end. CP to CF release patterns. These have a few different names. CF means center fleeing outwards. CP means inwards. If you're a Jim Hardy fan, you'll be a LOP, left outward pull, or you'll be an RIT, a right inward throw, and there are other names. It's very, very trendy at the moment, a bit like it's trendy to bow your wrist, where the actual faster pattern is much more the cupping wrist pattern, but it might not be as good on tour. It's very trendy at the moment to have a CP pattern. Now, if we take the idea that the left arm or the arms are working faster than the body's rotating body, it would make sense that the arm might leave the side of the rib cage but it might work more target-wise than the body's rotating. So if you ever see someone, I've never seen a long drive guy without a CF release, but that also part of the fact he's trying to hit up on it or she's trying to hit up on it, is that if you do see that, you don't have to follow the trend of making it CP. Two of my driving heroes, Sam Snead and David Duval, do go that way, but really fast guys very often go that way. And I think the other very important point is if you look at Rory or Tiger, they use inward arm releases, CP for their irons, but CF for their wood. So I'm only saying this because a lot of people that come in say, I've been trying to stop the club going out. But if you're swinging it that fast, don't do it. As long as you're rotating well through the shot, it's not a problem. And if you take away a CF release, you've just lost more than half of the Hall of Fame, because that is a really normal position to get to. So you don't have to CP it for everything, certainly not driver. It's a great pattern if you want to do it. No matter, an iron certainly would do it. You could use one pattern for woods and irons, or you could actually use two different patterns. Again, we're just talking speed today, so that's the relevance of that going on there. Steve?
Yeah, floating efforts. I've been a little bit quiet from P6 to P7 purely because, you know, my job is done as a ground reaction force coach, you know, and there's no golfer on the planet that can apply force after shaft vertical on the way down and it get out to the club and out through the body by impact. So, you know, this is a result and a byproduct. That floating left foot is all a byproduct of AP pushing towards 12 o'clock, vertical force pushing away from the ground. That floating left foot move, the more vertical is the foot away from the ground, the more AP is, you know, the foot away from the ball target line. So we see this kind of, and there is some away from target. So this kind of floating rainbow or arcing shaped foot, and we see Tiger very early on doing that move. We see so many, if not every single long driver doing that move. Patrick Reed. I mean, I was taught as a junior, quiet feet work a treat. I'm told to keep the feet still, told to keep my balance. But we know, you know, back in the days, I was wearing spiked shoes. My feet were in the ground. My feet were physically bedded into the ground. So interesting in a conversation when I first met Joe was what shoes he wears, and he was saying he wears trainers. And then he didn't have effectively the spikes sticking his feet in the ground.
He had no spikes in the left foot.
Yeah.
Spikes in the right foot.
Spikes in the right foot.
Yeah, took them out because that was the day before when every single shoe was still spiked.
Yeah. So, you know, very interesting. So, you know, that movement there is all a product of what's being done, force preceding motion, all of the correct forces timed on point at shaft vertical on the way down. Any questions? P7, P6 or P7 mechanics?
No, just
Gonna keep asking, Hank. I will keep teasing you and tempting you.
yeah, I admire your positivity about there's going to be questions. So maybe,
By the way,
maybe you will be rewarded at some point.
And with all of this, Hank, as well, is that, you know, any questions afterwards for anyone that watches this after the presentation, those that get the recording, those of you that are here, please reach out to Lee or myself on social media. And ask any questions. We really want to hear from you, and anything that you have here. You wake up tomorrow morning or you wake up with cold sweats in the middle of the night wondering that move, whether it'll work for one of your players, please just reach out to us. We'll answer any questions. Right, so we've been talking about this morning, Coxie, again.
Yeah,
One of our massive heroes here, so Coxie.
So for the youngsters who might not recognise him, this is Ian Woosnam, probably the most impressive player I ever saw. Watched him in the Open in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, 5'4" and just leading the driving stats. And it's a bit relevant to the two things we were just talking about there. You can. This is a Brian Manzella image as such. So you can see his shoulders. So if you start from right to left, you can see his shoulders going from closed to open. You can see his left arm very much across his chest in picture 3. And then, but two things you'll see is that he's got much more arm swing than he has body rotation, number one. And you can see that massive CF release that's taught out. You can see the club is being thrown down his right arm, and his arms are being thrown outwards as he's just chucked the club straight away. And you know, just one of the greats in hitting it. And pound for pound, probably one of the longest you'd ever see.
Yeah.
Just a fantastic player, and just the way he got speed out to the club head is excellent. So it was just following up on those 2 points of more arm swing than body rotation, CF release, and throwing the club down the right arm. We've discussed that a bit, and that was parametric acceleration. And then what we'll do, Hank, we'll go on to another bit. How are we doing time-wise? We've got time, haven't we?
We got time. We got half hour now, so we're
So
skip the next
why
slide.
don't we skip the tempo bit and we'll go on to speed training, yeah?
Yeah.
If we can go through that, Hank, and then we'll sort of answer some of the speed stick questions, yeah?
So bear with
good.
me a second. Hopefully this works. Technology is not my strength either. So you can see my slide now on the speed training.
Can't see it on this screen.
Won't be on that one. Hank, you can see that, yeah? Sorry, bear with me a second. Okay, I'm going to move that over there, Coxie, so you got it on your screen there.
Okay, fine. Can you see that, Hank?
Yeah.
You can still see the speed training bit. I've moved it on our monitors to a different screen. Is that all right?
Well, now there's the gears avatar screen, 3-time PJ Tour.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. I'm going to change that. Right, bear with me a second. I'm going to move this across to here. In theory, that should give me the ability to share it over there. Sorry, we're just doing a bit of technical jiggery pokery. Can you see that now?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Getting good at this now, Hank. I need to do more stuff on Zoom with you. I'm a Teams man.
Speed sticks, please.
Speed sticks. Yeah. So you can see that all okay. We're still all right.
Yeah.
There you go. I've got to chuck them over there. So Coxie's going to go into speed training now. So you probably won't hear much from me. I might be a demonstrator if he needs me. But I am here. I'm just sitting in the wings and operating the slideshow.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll talk. We might not talk all the slides on this, but we'll talk about it and my sort of experience. So Hank, I'm a nerd. I must have bought 1,000 speed training gadgets. I bought everyone. If there isn't one I bought, I don't know about it. Now, speed training, I said, it's a bit of a dark art, a long drive they've been doing for years. Super speed has given people that little window into it. And if we pull up the next screen, if you could, please, Steve, and we'll look at this. So with training, always hit the maximum intent. That's pretty straightforward. There's a speed reserve that becomes important. So if you can train to swing very fast, what a lot of people misunderstand with speed training, they think that they're trying to hit the ball on the course as hard as they can. What they're actually trying to do is train real high speeds as a reserve, and that brings up their playing speed. And in theory, done really well, you should feel like you're swinging the same speed, but it's going much quicker. I know Rory last year was sort of chasing Bryson. Maybe I think he admitted the wrong thing, because he was probably the best driver on tour all round anyway, and he was just trying to hit it too hard on the course. So someone asked me a question yesterday about Bryson, about max intent, how hard he's hitting it, is he hitting it hard? And if you look at the shot on the Ryder Cup on the first hole, I mean, he's got up to 218 ball speed in long drive. I think he might go over 220 with the new Callaway. He doesn't play at 220. I mean, even with a normal driver, he can get 205, 206. So 190 ball speed for him is chipping it, because he has so much speed reserve. So someone asked me that question yesterday, is he trying to hit it harder than anyone? I don't think he is. I think he's got that much speed that he can actually do it. But when you're training for speed, it must be with maximum intent. Go to the next screen, please, Steve. So over speed training, are speed sticks all that you need? So the reason I say this is that people think it is all that you need. I think it's a very, very, very small piece of the jigsaw. There's two different types of super speed sticks. There's a super speed on the right, which are the originals. There's one called raw speed. Now, the one on the left there, you can adjust the weights on. So if you're coaching or a player, this is quite a good one to take to a tour event, because you can throw those in the bag. If you do it in the gym, the threes are much easier because you haven't got to keep screwing the weight on it. A little side effect, if you're warming up for a tournament, you don't want to warm up heavy, you want to warm up light, you want to shock the system into speed. So when you see people warming up with too heavy clubs, or they take the heavy super speed, it's the wrong way around. They should be taking the light super speed. It'll shock your nervous system. We also know, I found this in long drive years ago, that the it's called the Olympic record idea, is that most Olympic records have been set in the afternoon or the evening, not in the morning. And I found that long drive guys are a lot slower in the morning, not slow, a few miles an hour slower in the morning than the afternoon if it's colder. And we know that they're much faster in the afternoon. I actually know that stat has now been verified on tour, that people are slower in the morning and they swing it faster in the afternoon. So if you're playing in the morning, really get the light stick going, as you'll start out a bit slow for the first couple. Now, for me, super speeds are a small piece of the jigsaw. I was the first man in Europe to have them. I got set in 2013. So they came out of the long drive business. For a lot of people, it's a new guide. They've actually been around quite a while. They came out of a Russian, light shot, putting light sticks and javelins they've been doing. So it's an old idea. Next screen, please, Steve. General overspeed, rules for overspeed, start and finish light. So I believe doing it in pyramids. You can go on to super speeds protocols. I think they're pretty good, apart from the one kneeling down. I don't think, I'd rather you did that sort of sitting on the seat I showed you earlier that way. I think the kneeling down one's not so good for your back. And I'd start light and I'd finish light. So I think the protocols are really quite a good thing to start with. I think you then bespoke it to you. Train fresh, so I'd certainly do it before I would hit balls. I wouldn't do it after I'd hit balls. So I don't think that's an advantage. I think you're tired. Another sort of, and I'll flip between ideas here as well, Hank. So in speed training, less is more generally. So generally you do 6 swings. But in actual fact, something I found out years ago is if you were trying to get someone to swing faster, you want to hit multiple balls. So a long drive guy might hit 300 drives a day, unrealistic for a tour player because they've got a putt and chip and pitch. And to hit 300 balls might take you a year to get your body even close to being able to manage that abuse as such. Now, Bryson followed the same pattern. He hit 20 balls, 30 balls, 50 balls, 60 balls. And quite often with those guys, they don't get fast to ball 50 or 60. Now, all of those are at max intent. Now, you're trying to build up fast twitch muscles. So if you go up to sort of 50, 60, get up to 100 balls, once you've got the speed and the muscles, you can then take down the quantity of swings that you're doing to a lower number. No technique thoughts. I think this is interesting. A lot of people still get tied up in technique. There's a weird story. When I first saw super speeds, I lent them to a couple of students. Come back about 3 swings later, so 3 weeks later, and they're faster. I said, "Oh, your swing's improved. You've been having lessons. What you've been working on?" "No, I've just been working on speed." So you'd be amazing the technical improvements that you might get just by working with speed. And very often, as you get someone faster, they become wary of losing accuracy. And I've actually found that's quite often the opposite. So the first thing someone will say to you, "I don't want to work on that. I'm going to start in everywhere." And very often they end up in it straighter. So I believe that's a little bit of myth. But only power thoughts. So that idea is they're not swing thoughts, they're power thoughts. Be fast past the ball. You can't actually theoretically be fast past the ball because when the club hits the ball, the club's slowed down. This really is just an idea to try and get the club working at the right time. I know in swinging down, many tour, but I know Kupka has a club at speed slightly faster before the ball than he has hitting the ball. It's interesting. So that he could get maybe a little bit more speed out of that because you've got to time the maximum speed when it comes out. And then train to kick off your session is a bit like earlier I said, is that you want to train fast before you hit balls, not the other way around. So general rules, I wouldn't kneel down. I'd rather do the seated one I showed you earlier, which was sort of sitting in this seat and doing it that way. I think, especially this is a swivel seat, takes a bit of pressure off my back as I'm going to do it. The rest of the stepping in, and sorry, Steve, there are some ground force ones you can do as well, yeah?
Yeah, there is, step drills, and they'll be on the level 1 protocol. So variations of the different step drills. You can step out, you can step in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the level 2 of the super speed training. So you get to the top of the backswing, you step out, you can have your launch pad there, have a slightly narrower stance, get to top of backswing, step into the downswing, so that way, and then swing the stick. So I do use that. I have been known to use that, variation of rather than stepping into the downswing, step out into the backswing. So you can do this one where you get some acceleration. Again, we're working on medial laterals. we're really shifting the COP. The step into the downswing is all about COP. Velocity is increasing the speed that your center of pressure, your cop moves to the left.
I believe in working in pyramids. I think you should start light, go heavy, finish light. You see this in many other fitness ideas. I think it works well that way. So I'll go light, get heavy, go light. I know the protocols for super speed are a bit the other way around. It's just my own opinion on it, and I might change that. And the more advanced you get, the bigger the pyramid. So you'd have more sections in the middle and go down to low. Work opposite way. I think there's some merit in that. There's also a deceleration idea, which I think has some merit. A lot of people getting into long drive at the beginning very often snap the club off their back as it comes around, it breaks. The principle behind the deceleration idea is if you were driving a car at this wall and you had really good brakes, you could drive faster for longer at the wall before slamming the brakes on. So from an injury perspective and from a speed perspective, you're very likely to swing faster at this point if you're not worried about slowing down. Where if you were driving the car at the wall and you had bad brakes, you'd be going very slow to it because you don't fancy it. So I do believe in that. I get more complex as you can move it. So basically, I alluded to this earlier that I would use a super speed in Steve's drill. So Steve's excellent pelvic rise drill of left foot forward, right heel up and swinging it. I would then introduce that into that part of the swing, irrelevant to a speed training part. I would do it from a technical part as well. So I use them quite often in technical, not just for speed stuff. Now, we don't need to talk particularly through this. This is Martin's. This is the fastest man on the planet. Interesting because that's what he does. And basically, he does these sets of 6. Now, if it was a person, I would bespoke this to each person. This would not be a set one. And I do believe in the idea of going 80. So there's 6 swings per set. And you can see 80, 90% and 4 times all out. Quite interesting from a technique point of view. Sometimes when you do the 80 and then you do the 90 before you go all out, sometimes the 90 is faster than the all out. That would then lead you to believe that maybe the technique and the sequencing was better than the 90 than the all out. So interesting that, but if you're not tracking it on a PRGR, you're guessing anyway. So as I said right at the beginning, if you're really going to work at speed in either personally or as a coach, you've got to be measuring as you're having a guess. Now, this really, you see it the week is week 1, every 3rd day. From a speed training perspective, I think you need to train at least twice a week. 3 times a week's excellent, but if you could get 2 in, I don't think it's too time consuming. It's only taking a small period of time of your practice. A lot of the lack of success with speed sticks is people just actually don't do what they say they're going to do. They just don't do it. So, and if we go to the next screen, please, Steve, we'll just see from here, this is Martin's week 3 to 5. Don't take everything as gospel. This is just his own. The 45 to 60 second rests is that you do that even if you're on a spin bike. You quite often do these hit sets where you do them and rest. If you feel that your speed's tailing off within the session, at that point you're making too many swings. And if you start trying to do it too many days, you've got no rest period in between. So you need rest between sets, and then you need rest between days. Otherwise, you'll just deplete the system and you'll start getting slower. You can see people at the beginning do too many. Next screen, please.
Question.
Oh, sorry.
Question. Perfect.
Yeah. So if you think about having like every 3 days the speed training,
Yeah.
how would you then build up the normal gym training around it?
I know plenty about gym. I'm not a gym expert. I would get to your gym expert and see how that fits around it. I know how a lot of tour players do it, or fitness wise. So it depends what you train. If you're training for strength, a lot of these guys do it as part of their gym training in the gym. But I would still do the 2 or 3 times a week. I would do that whether I was in the gym or not in the gym. And again, I suppose today's seminar was more what you could do on the golf course or on the driving range. Yeah. But a proper gym instructor will tell you how to schedule that properly. If the long drive guys, how they would do it, they would take these to the gym and do it before their workout, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Timo.
So I think we're up to week 6 and week 8 here. So this is just building this larger pyramid. And I said this will just be, if you get a chance to look at this later, this is just someone's, a very fast person, their own bespoke way of doing it. I agree with the pyramid idea. You just got to make your own up. And just talking about the gym stuff there, I think, you've got to measure it, see what works well. and it doesn't quite, it's not one size fits all with this. You know, I do believe it should be done before a gym session. It's just the timing of it and how you do it will be different. And many fitness people would give you a fitness routine and when to put the super speeds in there. You can also, if you're on tour, Steve, the tour guys quite often have a super speed training that they'll do within the event.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, seen some of that. I mean, some of the stuff that you mentioned, what we worked on with Ollie was to do the speed shockers, so 3 times a week to do 6 swings with the blue stick or the medium weight with the raw speed. And just really just shock the system that, you know, sometimes these guys tend to slow down. We understand fully why they're doing it. We know really that's the constraint of the golf course and really a mindset thing to control the golf ball. But what we want to do is just shock the, you know, the nervous system into just going a bit quicker. Just let the body know it can go faster. Just open them up. So we do that on we could do that on a sort of a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday kind of thing, which as you mentioned with Ollie, and it works quite well.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that's bespoke to every single person.
Absolutely.
Wise, yeah. You know, some people, you know, they're much slower in the morning. They're much better if the time permits just to do it in the afternoon or the evening. So it really is a bit bespoke to that.
Yeah.
Next screen there, please, Steve. Okay, so general rules for protocols. This is talking about the jet stick. You can buy that jet stick with the ball on from Mach 3, but it's easy enough to make your own. The chains and the ropes, you just put more chains and more ropes, the stronger you are. You could add this to the pyramid. It's a very good priming method to get you going. And in this particular one, the spin round as a counter force. Basically, Steve would, if the club gets really fast and swings out, it's pulling you this way. So the speed of the club itself will teach you to make a counter move going the other way. And get more complex as soon as you can move it. And this is basically, you might interpret that down into working from P5 to P6, left shoulder. So therefore, you then can implement that into part of your swing technique as well as the speed training. Okay, Hank, this is the bit you were asking me about. So, as a story, yes, I've Super Speeds 2013, put them in the hands of 2 or 3 really good tour players. Got them really fast, sort of 10, 15 mile an hour gains on the speed stick, yeah? So, come back, said, okay, all good, how's it going? Put them on the radar, they're faster. Put a ball in front of them, Hank, they're back to the same speed they've been doing the whole of their life, yeah? It hasn't made any change. And if you ask me, this then becomes the stumbling block with super speed. There's nothing to hit. There's nothing to line up with. And also, you know, from a mental perspective, one of the other guys, you know, I said to him, why are you not using that speed on the course? We said, well, I need to pay my mortgage this month, yeah? And I really want to try and hit the fairway, and the wife wants to go on holiday. And I sort of feel that I should try and hit the fairway and not hit a fast shot. So I also believe that a lot of players won't let that go. But really the problem, Hank, I think you said you've had this problem where they don't get the extra speed actually working out to the ball. Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah. So they get a lot of speed, and then you can see already on the video that the club face is in a position moving that it won't square up. So the kind of intuition takes over and slows down to square the club face.
Exactly that. So this is sort of it. So for me, number one, hitting fresh air. Now, because I use radars all the time, honestly, I don't actually know. No one's ever been able to tell me, is PRGR measuring at this point, this point, this point, this point? I actually don't know the answer to that. With my flight scope, you know, say you were going to hit 10 up on it or 10 down on it, I don't actually know the point where it's measuring. So the only thing this is, are you swinging it fast at the right point? And also there's nothing to square up, even the end of it's round, yeah? So, do you know when you think that you've invented something and then find out someone's already invented it? So how I started with this, with our golf club, we had millions of old head covers. And I learned from my dad used to box a lot and my granddad used to box a lot. And they always box with pads. You don't box hitting nothing. You need to make sure all your speed is being accrued at the right time and your brain and muscles are being ready for impact. So this for me is really the magic step over from super speed to actually hitting golf balls. So this is a gadget that's made, but I said earlier I was doing it with head covers. And what I was doing was that I was hitting one head cover and then a bit like the gym, because I wanted to add more weight, I then put another head cover, then another head cover and another head cover. And actually as well, Hank, something I've done that actually isn't available on the market. About 10 years ago, I got a really old wooden club and I drilled a hole in it and I made a slightly lightweight hitting object so you could hit balls with it. And I've got another one and put some weight in it. And I quite like the idea that you could actually hit them as opposed to hitting nothing. So I think there's some merit in that. That thing doesn't exist on the market. But back to this. So this is pad training. So this is now making sure that I'm going to hit something, because hitting nothing. So this is how I do it. I'll build the usable speed with super speed. I get that speed up over a few weeks. I then bring them into pad training. Now, this particular gadget is a ball. It has Velcro on the face and it has a red line. So things then sort of change. So I'm not going to hit it obviously because of the wall. This is nice and big and safe. I'm not worried about missing it. I also, when I'm hitting this, I'm not worried about injuring myself particularly because it's very safe to hit, yeah? But I have to square it up through the red lines and I have to get the Velcro to stick it. So now my intent changes. So what I would actually from then do, you can see it there, is that what I would then do is I would start to try and take my usable speed and starting to try and put it into this shot. So suddenly now I've got to square something, hit something, and my body and brain are becoming aware and ready for impact. It changes things. Also, Hank, the other thing talking about that is that it's known in the long drivers that the guys will hit multiple balls at max in 10. They'll get used to hitting balls. So the super speed starts it, but you're not hitting anything. So I would do super speed, pad, and then I would turn that into balls. And I'd try and build this massive speed reserve, like Bryson's got. 206 ball speed, and he plays at 190. So he brings it right back down. Joe Miller, the long drive king, is a fantastic driver of the ball playing. He can swing at 155. He plays at about 139, 140, and he looks like he's hitting chippy fairway fibers down there. The guy never misses a fair. He's a brilliant driver of the ball. So that speed reserve is important. So you get the pad. Now, what I then did is that what started to sort of perplex me a bit is I didn't really like the steel shaft and the ball, because even that wasn't a golf club. So I then got a Callaway club. So at one point I was sponsored by Callaway. So they gave me this club. I had it custom fitted. My shaft, a whole lot. I am rubbish with this club. Rubbish. I cannot hit a fairway with it. So in the end, I converted it into a hitting object. I put Velcro on the face. So I put Velcro on the face of it. So what we'd actually see here is I then created my own hitting club. So it's my shaft, my grip, my club head, and then I started pounding objects with it. And in the old days, as I said, I used to do head covers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'd build the resistance. And you can actually see there in those pictures. So I've got the speedball, which is the actual object. I've actually replaced this, and this is another one. I've got R7 that's got the Velcro on the face. Then I've got the hitting objects. The length of the tail is the more resistance. So if you were going down the gym and you were trying to increase it, you'd increase the resistance by putting the tail on it. But what there is at the bottom are just homemade ones. You don't really need to buy anything. That's T-tails that are wrapped around sponges. You can see inside those pictures. The only thing you're going to do if you're going to do that in the gym, just warn the person next to you before you do it, is you'll scare the life out of them, yeah? So it's really noisy. But for me, Hank, to answer your question in a sort of long roundabout way, I think super speeds are very good and a small piece of the jigsaw in building usable speed. You then need to train that into usable speed hitting pads, because then it becomes relevant, squaring the face and getting up the resistance. I then would transfer that over to the ball hitting in the net. Hitting in the net becomes very important for me, because then you're not worried about where the ball's going. And then try and build up that massive speed reserve by upping the quantity of balls and the max intent. So then the feeling should be that the person who was swinging 110 can then stand there and hit it at 118, feeling like they haven't changed anything. Impact training is over speed, all you need. So here we go, my ideas. And then you want to hit the maximum of 10. I would stick to the 80, 90 all out pattern, albeit the 90 might actually end up going faster. I'd use impact training to extend the speed sessions and hit something. I'd take advantage of priming from sticks. So I'd start with that to build me up before I went for it, yeah? Other things of interest. So one-handed swings I found really help. So now I'd start one-handed swings with super speeds, left arm, right arm. I'd then measure them. I then do left-handed swings this way. The only thing you need to be careful with the pad for the first time, there's an injury potential in the shoulder complex here, so I take it easy. I then measure my left arm and right arm. Now, 90% of the people I've measured, their left arm is faster than their right arm. The object of this would be to make both arms faster and both the same speed. So interestingly, you could see someone with a real deficiency in their right arm motion. If you build that up, that will also build their speed up. So I'm a big, big fanatic of one-handed swings with a super speed, then with resistance, then even them up a little bit. Next picture, please. So half the quarter swing stop. So this, we talked about this earlier. This is using that scarf, but I'm going to do it from a stop position and I'm priming it. You want to fire through impact. Resistance makes you work harder. This was also with the fan. For speed, use between heavy sets, yeah, so you can integrate that into your super speed. And for technique, use it if you want to, if you're doing bad in that motion. You want to test the resistance with easy swing and go all out. So don't make the towel too big. If you're not strong enough, make it smaller. And this is important. Speed is created by going after it. Don't be frightened when you don't hit it straight. And we know Bryson and many other guys learn speed in the net. They take away the ball in the fairway to actually get another. I told you the silly story about the guy who didn't want to hit driver because he had to pay his mortgage that week. If you can get someone to train for speed when they're not worried about where it's going, and even if I had this in my bay where I've got a flight scope where it's measuring speed of the ball, I hide where the ball's going, or I turn the setting on to speed only. So say I've got a flight scope, you could do this with TrackMan. If I had it on the screen, I'd only have clubhead speed up that day. I'd only have ball speed up that day. I'd only have spin up that day. I don't show them the 28 numbers because I don't want them to see them. The intent of the day must stick with the thing you're working on. So if you're going for clubhead speed that day, go for clubhead speed. If you're going for ball speed that day, only put ball speed up. If you show the person the screen and it's going 50 yards right, they will stop immediately what you're doing because they won't buy into it. You won't feel how much recovery. That was sort of the question a bit earlier. Your nervous system needs sometimes less is more. This is what I mean about just a bit of trial and error. 2 times a week might be enough. 3 times a week might be. Some people might go 4 times a week. Some people fade out of energy quickly. Some people don't. And it just depends on what time of day. And just test it. So if you're having a slow day and you're going for speed, don't work on speed. Work on technique. Do it the next day. But you just need to find out your exact bit. Now, sorry, Steve, could you go back to one screen there, please? Could you go back to the DeChambeau picture from the tempo bit? Could you pull that up? Or is that not easy to get up?
No, that's easy. Let me just give me a second. So back in tempo, yeah?
Yeah.
Let me a second.
So there's a tempo section. Now, to cut the whole story short with this, yeah, tempo also plays a huge part in being able to produce speed. Now, Steve's going to play this video and potentially slow this down. So this is, I haven't got my glasses on. This is Bryson 2016 to 2020. A few people said to me, the picture on the left, he's not hitting it hard. He's trying to hit it hard. I've asked him that question, yeah. Is that you can see the tempo also plays a major part in upping this. So you can look at his physical transformation. You can look at his swing transformation, but his tempo transformation is off the planet. So in the picture on the right, he is now hitting the ball where he used to be at the top of his backswing. If we can feed that back a little bit still, I don't know, he's in it. Okay, another frame there. Look at the difference, it's unbelievable. So the other thing is that if you take the club to swing the same distance over an elapsed time, if you can make that elapsed time quicker, the stretch across the muscle systems and getting back to the ball, make it quicker. So you could argue that you could also train speed from a tempo perspective. And just doing that, you can actually swing so much quicker doing that. There's many tempo things out there, metronomes and paces. The swings are done at 3-to-1 ratios. The way to do it properly, how they do it, there's a frame counter that you measure it. So 3-to-1 means your downswing's 3 times quicker than your backswing. The way to do tempo properly, so the normal patterns you'll see on tour, 24-8, that's 24 frames back, 8 down, 21-7, 21 back, 7 down. 18-6 would be Matt Fitzpatrick or Martin Borgmeyer, very, very fast. The secret to tempo training actually is try all of them, find out which gives you the fastest clubhead speed and ball speed, and find out which one gives you the straightest golf shot. But you can see Bryson taking away all the other changes he's made one of the biggest changes he made as a fact is how quickly he moved the club away and how quickly he can get back to impact from his original tempo. I mean, that's a real eye-opener, that picture.
Cool. Right, so we're pretty much there, mate. That's good. Hank, we've kind of come to the end of where we're at with the presentation with the sections here. We touched on tempo there. To complete the tempo section, we'd probably need about another hour. So we're good with what we've presented, what we've got here from the mechanics, the speed, and a little bit of tempo. So we kind of allocated a little bit of time for questioning or discussion. You know, we're quite open now to move on to the discussion bit. If anyone wants to talk about any examples of pupils or lessons that they've had, let us know.
Thank you very much. Really good, and lots of information and new information as well. But like you said, Steve, please ask questions if you have any kind of like case studies yourself that you've had a hard time coaching speed. Now is a good time to ask. One question about the tempo. Do you measure, like you mentioned, you measure frames? Do you measure also kind of the time?
Yes.
Times do you?
Yeah, so, and sorry, that's a good thing. You can buy a tempo app for the best ones about £20. Yeah. You could also on your video. So I know I've used Huddle, Hoodle, however you say it. It has a frame reference of time of swinging it back and forward. So if you don't even want to buy the app, probably the video system that you're using can actually, you can count frames on that, and then you can work out the tempo without having the beats. The only thing sometimes tempo apps do is they make a noise. So you go beep, beep, beep. So you get that, which you can actually follow from a practice perspective. But you can measure tempo on frame rate, even on the camera. So that's a good point, man. Probably the best way I've ever seen do it is, you got sound there.
Set, through, swing, set, through.
You can change that to the tones instead of the voice.
Swing.
So that's 21/7.
21/7. So that's me. The only trouble with that tune, Hank, is when you try and go to sleep at night, it haunts you, that song in your head. So that would, for me, be the best way in the tones. But yes, Hank, you can measure that on a video with the frame rates itself without buying the app for the noises.
Any questions from people online? No.
Hey, Steve, you had these online lessons on your website. So do you have any special offers for us to do online training?
Me or Lee? Sorry, what question was that? Who was that for, Timo? Sorry.
So that was Steve for you, that you had online lessons on your website. So
Yes.
if I want to do like 5 lessons for you, do you have any special offers for us?
Yeah, no problem. You know, best thing to do, reach out to me in person. There's certainly stuff that we can do from a ground reaction force perspective. If you're able to get on plates, a lot of the work that I do with clients is I get them to go and do some data capture somewhere. Doesn't matter what plate, it could be body track, it can be swing catalyst, just get some idea if we've got something there to use. If you're able to jump on a set of force plates or swing catalyst 3D, great, but it doesn't matter. What we can do, obviously, I can do it from 2D. You generally, some lines from the level 1, I put lines on the belt line and look at when the belt line is rising, so I stop it sharp vertical, etc. So yeah, look, the best thing to do, if there's anyone that wants to kind of, you know, expand their knowledge for their own game, you know, to improve, or wants to just learn a little bit more, I can do that. If they just want to do ground reaction force specific, I can certainly do screen sharing and bring up my gas stuff and go into a bit more of the level 1, kind of advanced level 1, and bring up more case studies of work that I've done with players.
Yeah, I have the V1 mat, which I can use for measure the pressure.
Okay, yeah, perfect. All right, that's good. So we've got pressure, we've got pressure plates, pressure mats is vertical force. So we've got timings of vertical force, we've got COP, which is fine. We don't have COM, but it's not, you know, all we need is really from that perspective is look at when you're getting your timings. and how quick you're moving your COP across. That always correlates with speed as well.
Cool.
Any remarks considering equipment, like fitting for speed, grip size, etc.? Or
From a club fitting perspective,
yeah,
I can't say I don't. So it's interesting from an absolute speed. I'm not sure this is great to play with, Hank. So if you look, the trend in long drive has always been to have very thin grips, ladies' size, or you stretch them down there to get your wrist more active. From a fitting point of view, a lot of long drive guys these days use regular to soft shafts. That's why they look so bendy. I also don't think that's great to play with. So their fittings, their CPMs on the shaft and the head weight then becomes very important. From a playing perspective, I think for tour players, amateurs and the like, a great fitter would fit really well, but it wouldn't be relevant to real speed. So you can play with CPM on the shaft, you can play with thickness of grips, and then I say long drive guys all down there, Bryson's got really thick grips, yeah? So that's blown that out of the water already, yeah?
Yeah.
From my perspective, Hank, so I'm just going to talk about shoes. So this is the study that I'm kind of going into now. A company that I've just recently just purchased some new footwear from a True Links, which is an American company. And the reason why I reached out to them is they have their shoe, their original shoe, which has got 0 heel to toe drop. So I'm going to bring you just an example of a shoe here, which has got a heel to toe drop. So the heel being higher than the toe. So effectively propping the shoe up like that. Now, I wanted to really explore more of a golf shoe that is more, on the foot and the anatomy of the foot, looking at the shape of the foot, being more natural without any sort of wedges underneath the heel. Now they do their original, which has got 0 and also wide toe box. But this isn't a True Link shoe, by the way. I've just pulled up a shoe. I've got the True Link stuff coming to me, and I should have it in the next few days. But wide toe boxes as well, because we're seeing a lot of the modern shoes, they bring the toes in, which don't allow the toes to splay. And we know from that perspective, if we're going this way, we're pushing up through the metatarsal heads. We need the toes to go outwards for us to spring up, right? It's kind of almost that spider kind of pushing away. If we don't have that, because our toe boxes are so narrow, we can't push out of the ground. But we need to be careful from a shoe perspective that we don't go and take a senior golfer and throw them into a shoe that's got 0 heel to toe drop. They might need that stabilizer under the heel to keep the pressure forwards. So, and they may need the sort of speed or stabilizing aids actually in the sole of the shoe as well. So this is a discussion that I'm talking with True Links, and they've got actually a transition shoe range. They go from a 0 up to about a 4, I think it's 4 millimeters of heel to toe drop. So they've actually got some, different variety up to centimeters, I believe, a variety of different shoes. So I think we're going into an era now where understanding this. FootJoy have got force plates at Titleist over at Woburn in the UK. We know from TPI in the States, there's going to be a lot more coming out in the next few years where actually shoes will be specifically fitted to the golfer. And then we'll have a different shaped sole. Okay. Anything else? If we're all good, we can round things up, Hank.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a last chance for questions, but maybe one remark, conclusion is that many of the things that why people are not kind of applying the rules of how to create speed is being taught in the golf industry. So like you said, Lee mentioned yourself, it's like you were taught to kind of stay still and
yes, yeah, exactly that, Hank. I mean, that it taught out of me. I think they might be turning full cycle. I mean, 6-7 years ago, no one could work out what Bubba's doing, but it actually makes sense, So best driver on tour for 6 or 7 years, and I think it might be turning a bit of full circle there, Hank. I think as information comes out, certainly from a leg perspective, foot perspective, because I think things are changing a little bit, and certainly I think players, certainly pros are like sheep. They'll tend to follow what the next person's doing. I think with Bryson putting up big numbers, a lot more people will go down that route. I guess from his swing actually looks more orthodox now than it ever did, apart from maybe the funky final bit at the end. So I think it's an avenue that a lot of people would do. I think also as well that the great book, you know, Every Shot Counts, that came out a few years ago, that told everyone that speed was important for lower scores. So I think that became important. I did a bit of work with Molinari a few years ago to add distance, and he was probably the first great guy to benefit from speed, but he came from a very low starting point to above tour average. And I think more people, and I think from the people out there coaching it, it's the greatest business plan, Hank, that I had that I never planned. That I got into speed coaching, yeah. So I didn't do that for a reason. It was something I was interested in. I got involved in the long drive, but for coaches now, you know, I've built a business on speed that if you can, in your job and your work there, if you can advertise that you understand teaching speed, you'll get people coming through your door all the time. Because in the end of it, you know, men particularly love hitting it a long way, yeah. And it's a real big open book out there for people to learn how to create speed and learn how to teach it. You can get your diary pretty filled up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, it's like people many times they think that speed and accuracy are kind of like controversy, even though they come together. If you create a better sequence, you create more speed and more accurate golf shots. So
100%. You know, from a speed perspective, I think you have to move very well as well to generate speed, and generally those two go hand in hand. You actually end up swinging it a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speed and sequence and timing. 100%.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Steve and Lee. Much appreciated. 3 hours went quick, and maybe we can figure out something to continue after this as well. So would we like to?
I would like to thank you for sitting there and listening to us for 3 hours, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Hank, for organising all this, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you guys for this period of time through level 1 and level 2. Watch this space. Level 3 is going to be short game. I'm working with Alex Buckner on specific wedge shots with 3D motion capture and ground reaction forces. So that's currently being written, and there's lots more coming out. There's some exciting developments, you know, with some different technology as well, which I'm looking at with a new company. So yeah, watch this space. Lots going on, and I think that like we say, any questions that you have, please just post them just privately to us if you want to. Reach out. Lee is at Lee Cox Golf.
LeeCoxGolf@gmail.com.
@gmail.com if you want to email, but then on Instagram you're at Lee Cox Golf.
Correct, yeah.
And I'm Instagram, if you don't already follow me, I'm at SF Golf Perform. And if you want to contact me via email, it's stevefurlonger@gmail.com.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everybody being.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.